Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
I had always looked up to Charlie, but that wasn't anything unusual. He was 2 years older than me, and he was my brother. When Charlie was 32, he started feeling pain under his arms and a tightness in his throat. Since he had never really been sick before, he tried to brush it off, hoping it would just go away. But after 2 months, the pain persisted, and the tightness in his throat only worsened. It was his wife, Maggie, who finally convinced him to see a doctor and get checked out. On the small island where we all lived, Charlie was the driving force behind everything that happened. After spending 5 years on the mainland for school, he had taken an extra year to travel the world and explore the places he'd always dreamed of as a kid. It was during that journey that he met Maggie and fell in love with her. When Charlie returned to the island with his beautiful Irish bride, Maggie, the disappointment among the local women and girls was palpable. It was no secret that many had secretly hoped Charlie would come back and choose one of them to be his wife. In the week that followed his return, it was said that more island girls lost their virginities than in any previous year. They had been holding out, dreaming that Charlie might pick them. Meanwhile, the boys and men who were the unexpected beneficiaries of this sudden change in heart found themselves not only enjoying these intimate firsts, but also enduring the tears and heartache that came with them. What should have been moments of passion were often interrupted by sobs of lost hopes and unfulfilled fantasies. I myself had been offered numerous opportunities to be the second choice of some of those girls, but I gently turned each offer down, not wanting to serve as a poor second choice or a Charlie substitute. I had hopes of someday finding someone who would want me as her first choice, not as some lesser consolation prize. 10 years later, and I was still looking. The doctor was enough concerned about his earliest preliminary findings that he sent Charlie away for further testing and consultations on the mainland. Charlie spent 2 weeks at Johns Hopkins undergoing a full battery of diagnostic exams. In the end, all the physicians were in agreement about what Charlie was afflicted with, and Charlie was allowed to return to the island to get his final affairs in order. After my father had died, Charlie had inherited the island. He owned everything, lock, stock and barrel, fee simple, and unencumbered. My father had always told us that we, meaning our family, owned the island and other things in an unofficial trust of sorts, a partnership that was implicit, rather than being either a legal obligation or somehow binding on us. We were the caretakers of the island, and ownership was more a legal technicality than an actual state of being. When Charlie returned to die, there were 711 souls living on the island. Word quickly spread about Charlie's condition, and soon the island was in utter turmoil. Uncertainty usually produces fear, and this fear produces some high emotions and panic. When my father had died, everyone had known that Charlie would be taking over, and there was only the sadness at my father's passing. With the news of Charlie's rapidly approaching death, the island residents were fearful of the change that might be coming. This was fueled by a rumor that Maggie was going to sell the island and move back to Ireland with Seamus and Megan, Charlie and Maggie's 2 young children. I didn't see Charlie for several days after he returned. I knew that he'd want to spend time alone with Maggie and his children. I walked the windward side of the island, head down and chin tucked in, dealing in my own quiet way with the loss that I was already feeling. My parents had only been able to produce 2 children before my mother drowned in a sailing accident when I was 2. My father never remarried, and we were raised by most of the island's women. Charlie and I were welcomed in every island home and felt like we both belonged to a huge, extended island family. It never really occurred to me that we were the island's royal family until the week of my father's passing. As I walked back and forth among the dunes and washed up flotsam, I couldn't help wondering what I'd do if Maggie did sell the place of my birth. I'd never left this island because all I had ever wanted was right there for me already. I'd never applied myself in school because Charlie was already taking care of that himself by undertaking a strict and comprehensive course of study. He was being groomed and prepared for the role he would one day have to undertake. As the younger son, I was allowed to indulge myself in whatever made me happy or caught my interest and fancy. I was a decent sailor, able to make my way competently in anything with sails that was under 60 feet in length. I could swim as well as anyone I knew, and I could dive beneath the waves and stay under for 2 minutes or more on a single breath. Climbing the palm and coconut trees was easy for me, and I had hunted the wild pigs with success from the age of 9. I knew everyone on the island, and had never been in a fight or had to strike anyone in anger. Those were my skills and accomplishments, not much in the way of either foundation or preparation, with which to undertake a new career in a strange place where I'd be unknown to everyone. I looked behind me as I walked, hearing a distant voice calling after me. It was Charlie, and he strode after me with his long steps, that just seemed to glide above the sand. I never knew how he managed to do that, as I'd sink down to my ankles when I walked along the same sandy path as him. Grant, hold up now. Don't force me to keep chasing after you. I stopped and waited for him to reach me. When he was close enough, he circled me into his arms, and the two of us shared a moment of closeness and sadness. We didn't discuss the health news, mostly because neither of us had anything to add or say about the medical reality. Charlie loosened one arm from me, and with the other arm he pushed me forward in the direction I had been going before he approached me. It's good to see you, CC. I was hoping to run into you before now. You got a new girl or something? Charlie, I figured I'd give you some time with Fran and the little nippers first. It's gotta be hard trying to explain things to everyone. Doc Mahler told me what the people over at Hopkins said. I don't understand why shit like this has to happen. First Pop, and now you. It's like no one I give a damn about ever makes it past 45 or so. How can you get cancer like that, throughout your whole system, in less than a year? Well, the symptoms for a year maybe, but the cancer, who knows when it first started? I looked at my brother then, waiting for him to tell me about how long he'd felt bad things happening inside him. I wanted to cry, and to go out and destroy something, all at the same time. It was so unfair. It wasn't just Charlie and Maggie and the kids and me. It was the hopes and lifestyles of more than 700 people that were being affected by this cancer. It was killing Charlie, but none of the rest of us were exactly going to escape untouched by it. I've got 2 or 3 months CC, that's what we need to worry about now. We need to make sure that everything can go on pretty much like before, after my time is done. It's going to be up to you, big guy. That's what Maggie and I decided. I stopped and just stared at him. There was no way that he could even believe that I could fill in for him. I didn't want to, that was the first thing, but even if I did, I wasn't qualified to do it. I'd watched him preparing for years to do what he now did. I remembered the first year or two after Dad died, the 16 and 18-hour days that Charlie had to put in 7 days a week, all the daily decisions that needed to be made, and how one thing always affected 10 others. Charlie made mistakes too, plenty of them in the beginning, and that's where most of the time was spent, doing things to make the mistakes less costly and harmful to the island. Our economy was a fragile thing, and not at all self-sustaining. Food had to be shipped in, and money that we made in mainland investments had to be used to keep everything balanced and working. I knew nothing about how things worked on the island. I turned on the shower, but I didn't know what it took to keep all the pipes working and the water supply clean and safe. Those were Charlie's responsibilities. Maggie needs to sell the island, then Charlie. I can't do it. He just looked at me with those sad eyes that I'd seen all of my life. It always hurt me more to disappoint Charlie than anyone else, even our father. He knew I wasn't trained for this. It wasn't fair for him to ask me either. We're not selling CC. It isn't an option, so just forget that, okay? When I die, the island goes to you. I don't control it, that's in the original charter. Maggie won't be leaving. Megan and Seamus, this island is their birthright, so they aren't leaving either. You need to be the caretaker now. When Seamus gets older, if you've done a good job and gotten him trained right, maybe then you can turn it over to him and go back to sailing and fishing and hunting all day. Not before then, though. Do a good enough job, and you'll get to sit back when you're 55 and start living your perfect life again. I can't do it. Nothing you can say is going to make me qualified to do it, Charlie. Maybe we can hire someone to come over and manage it for us? I really feel bad for you, Grant. If I could change places with you, I would. I'm sure you think that my dying is a lot easier than you're having to take care of things for a few years. To me, though, I'd love the chance to stick around and do what I always planned on doing. You didn't ever plan for anything, CC. Don't you think it might have been a good idea to look in once in a while, just to see how things ran? Didn't it ever occur to you that this day might come? You're 30, and you've never done a day's work in your life. You need to grow up, and it better be fast, because in a month, when my strength starts to fail, and they're shooting me up with painkillers, you won't have anyone else to answer the questions that you need to be asking me now. You never asked me to learn anything, Charlie. Today's the first I've heard that I was your backup plan for the island. Couldn't you have at least warned me, or dropped a few hints? I was scared and, maybe, more than a little bit pissed at how he was treating me now. All of my life, I checked with Charlie about almost every decision I'd made. When Dad died, I never did anything without Charlie telling me that it was okay. He wasn't being fair now. I'm sorry, CC. You're right. I thought there was more time, and that it wasn't necessary for you to learn. I'm sorry. I guess I just don't want everyone to suffer because I wasn't prudent enough to anticipate this possibility. I'm scared now more than I've ever been. Not just of dying, although that's no picnic either. I'm scared for Maggie and the kids, for you, and for the island and all its people. I've botched things up badly, and I need you to step in and pull everyone out of the mess I've made. I'm a poor steward, and Dad would be disappointed in how I'm leaving the responsibility he entrusted to me. I hadn't seen Charlie cry since my father's funeral, almost 9 years before. Both of us were crying now. I couldn't do what he wanted me to do, but I couldn't let him die thinking that his whole life, and what he believed had been his sole purpose for existence, was ending in abject failure either. Charlie, if you could learn it, how hard can it be? You think I can learn it all in a single day? Or should I plan on it taking 2 or 3? He looked at me with the look I'd always wanted from him. We walked back to his office at the plantation. He started right in during the walk back, letting me know that Maggie would be a big help to me, and telling me who on the island really understood how different things worked. When we got to his office, he started in by showing me where all the paperwork was kept and how the various accounts were all interconnected with each other. We sold tea, tobacco leaf, sugar, and fish to the mainland and bought almost everything else we needed from them. There was a complicated investment portfolio which had to generate sufficient income to pay for the difference between what we earned from sales and what we spent for supplies and for replacement parts for the worn-out island systems. We had no phones, and our electricity came from 3 small diesel generators and some windmills hooked up to batteries. Our water system was a natural cistern and jerry-rigged pipes that had been set up and added to in a haphazard manner over the past 50 years. It cost my family more than $100,000 of our family's investment income every year to keep the island economy afloat. In the 8+ years that Charlie had charge of the island, family income from island activities had dropped to the point where we were dipping into investment principal every year for the past 4 years. This year, our annual shortfall was projected to be more than $20,000. Of the 700 residents on our island, only 60 or so contributed to our economy in any direct manner. Until that day, I was one of the heavy majority that had contributed nothing. We owned a store on the island, but people just came by and took what they wanted or needed, and wrote down in a book the things that they'd like us to get for them. No one ever paid for anything. Charlie told me that was how it had always been, and that was how our father told him to continue doing it. I used that month he'd promised me, and a lot more besides. As Charlie began taking more and more pain medicine, the time we spent together became more about 2 brothers saying goodbye, and less about the old guy breaking in the new guy to the workings of his job. Charlie began to slowly disconnect and drift away from all of us. Cancer can be all-consuming, eating away at more than just the interior organs of its victim. The day finally came when Maggie begged me to leave Charlie alone with her and the children. She felt that seeing me made Charlie feel his guilt at having somehow failed the island more intensely. She wanted him to die surrounded by the successes of his short life, and not what he perceived as his failures. Reluctantly, I said goodbye and told him that I loved him. As tradition demanded, the plantation bell was rung 5 times, telling the island that Charlie was finally at peace. I heard the bell as I walked not far from where Charlie had caught me that day when he first told me that I was to be his successor. I dropped to my knees and finally let out my own anger and my own very real fear of failure. With Charlie now dead, some large part of me wanted to jump in one of the fishing boats and head off to the mainland. I knew I could easily lose myself in one of the cities on the coast and find a way to live out my life being only responsible for myself. If I'd done what I wanted to do, this would be a far different story. It was dark out when I finally got my emotional things together and stood back up and walked home to my small shack. I got up in my hammock and rocked myself to sleep. Life on the island for me had always been so simple. I fished and hunted and walked all over watching to see what everyone else was doing. When I got hungry, I went to someone's house and they fed me and gave me something to drink. In 30 years, no one had ever turned me away. I would take my fish and bring them to houses and divide the catch-up among the people who fed me. The same held true for any wild pig that I killed. I often helped people trap sea turtles and to harvest the delicious sea turtle eggs when they were laid and covered on the beach. Coconuts, mangoes, pomegranates, bananas, and other fruits could be picked from the trees while I was walking around. I knew who liked what and would often drop things off as I walked by. Rock lobster was something I had to dive for, but I knew all the places where they could be found and was always ready to go for a quick dive. When Charlie died, my perfect island lifestyle died with him. We buried him next to my father, and near the headstone we'd put up for my mother when she drowned and her body hadn't been found. Tradition dictated that I needed to speak at every island funeral now. Charlie's funeral was my first official act as the new owner. I said some words and spoke of what Charlie had meant to me, and about how he always wanted to do his best for the island. I told the people that Charlie had been the last of the traditionally trained owners, and that I would be flying without a compass or any training to speak of. I ended by telling them all that there would be big changes coming and that they better get prepared. After the funeral, I walked Maggie and the kids back to the plantation and then I turned to head back to my shack. Where are you going, Grant? Your place is here now. I've moved all of our things out of the big room. That's where you are to live now. I'm staying in Poppy's old room until the children and I decide what we'll be doing. After my mother had died, my father couldn't stand their huge bedroom suite anymore, and so he'd moved everything of his out to a big downstairs room on the leeward side of the great plantation house. His room had opened up to the veranda in the side yard, and that was where he'd spent the remainder of his life. That room was right next to Charlie's office, now mine. I had to keep reminding myself. I had planned to use Pop's old room myself on nights when the weather was bad and I didn't feel like walking back over to my shack. When Charlie and Maggie came back to the island, my father had installed them in the main suite where he and my mother had spent their entire married life. No one had asked me or told me of their plans for me living there. I didn't think I'd be comfortable living up there in that room that was more than 3 times as big as my comfortable shack. I hadn't slept in a real bed for more years than I cared to remember. I didn't think that it was a good day to upbraid Maggie for being presumptuous about dictating where I was to sleep. I knew that I could hang my hammock out on the upstairs balcony anyway. My parents had a hammock out there for many years, and my father had left it when he moved out of the room. It was gone now, but I could get another, or make a new one if I had to. I went upstairs after telling the family good night, and found that someone had packed up most of my things in wooden boxes and carted them over from my shack. My old hammock was on top of one of the boxes, and it only took me 10 minutes to plait a braid that extended the hammock to fit the 2 large hooks that stretched across the veranda railing's 6x6 support beams. It was a little lower than I was used to, but it would serve unless a rain squall came in from the east. Luckily, that was very unlikely for another 6 months. I slept out on the balcony, comfortable enough considering that it was the first time I'd been back sleeping in the plantation since I was 12 years old. My father hadn't believed in being too controlling of his children, especially with me. He pretty much let me make my own living and eating decisions as long as I reported in to either him or Charlie at least a couple of times each week. In the 10 years before his death, I couldn't remember my father ever needing to come looking for me. I would see him almost every day anyway, because the island wasn't that large, and because I made it a point to see a lot of the island every single day. I may not have done much that was productive, but I made sure that everyone knew that I was still around and willing to pitch in if needed. I came downstairs at about 7 the next morning and went into the owner's office. For the first time, I sat down at Charlie's desk and swiveled in his chair. I was 4 months from my 31st birthday. I stood at about 6'1" and weighed somewhere near 190. I could read and write and do sums to at least a 10th grade level. There wasn't a single paper in the owner's office that I'd ever signed myself, not a contract or agreement that I'd ever approved or ratified, but by some process that I still didn't understand and knew that I had never really agreed to. I found myself responsible for everything on the island. My island now, and my responsibility too. I wasn't qualified by either skill or temperament for the job I found myself filling, but I do my best and hope that a combination of luck and willing knowledgeable advisors would see me through until Seamus was ready and able to take over for me. My goal was simple. I wanted to keep the island afloat financially until then, and I'd try to see that everyone here could go about their normal lives able to live like we'd all lived for the past 100 years or so, on this beautiful serene island of ours. When I saw the double doors to my father's old room open sometime within that first hour that I was sitting in Charlie's chair, I was caught up in the sight that Maggie gave me as she stood between me and the morning light wearing a thin white nightgown. With the strong sunlight behind her, I could plainly see the outline of her body underneath her gown. She was a gorgeous woman. Although caring for Charlie in the last days of his illness had taken its toll, her clear, fair Irish complexion and her wonderfully muscled and toned body were on full display. I'd always marveled at Charlie for summoning the confidence to have ever approached this Irish goddess, and never more so than when I saw her standing there in that light, posing for me, both of us knowing that this was a deliberate act on her part. It constituted an unequivocal offer, I was sure. It appeared that my beautiful sister-in-law had made a momentous decision about her own future, and about the futures of her children as well. I found myself wondering whether it had been her decision, or something that Charlie had pressed upon her. I had never been with a woman. This was a decision that I had made on my own. Over the years I'd had many opportunities, but I'd never given in to my desires and cravings. I'd carried a vision of what I wanted in a woman. Maggie, silhouetted in that sunlight, surpassed that vision in almost every aspect. I felt myself grow hard. At the same time, I was determined that I'd do nothing to dishonor either her memory of Charlie or the high regard I held both of them in. I stood up from my chair, aware of the unmistakable outline against my thin white trousers, a flush of embarrassment creeping up as I tried to keep my composure. I bowed slightly in her direction. acknowledging her even though I couldn't trust my voice to speak to her right then. I walked outside and went looking for a morning meal. Surely Maggie knew that this was going to complicate my situation at a time when I was already overwhelmed. I closed my eyes and traced mentally the shape that she had so casually allowed me to see. Charlie had once told me that Maggie was unlike any woman he'd ever known. He hinted that he'd known his fair share, and more, while attending university. As I'd admitted to having had no experience with girls or women, Charlie had not attempted to go into specifics with me. She's the perfect balance and blend CC, no inhibitions or holdbacks. She has beauty, brains, and an unlimited ability to enjoy life. I tried to get her to bring Fiona, her sister, here for you, but she absolutely refused to. We'd never spoken of her like that again. But I remembered the look on his face as he described her. Charlie had never seemed more enviable than at that moment in time. While he lived, I'd coveted nothing of Charlie's. Was I going to end up taking his place in every aspect of his life? Would I somehow lose myself, my own identity, and become Charlie's surrogate, a father to his children, husband to his wife? Is that what I'd settle for? I could certainly have settled for far less. I spent all of the next month doing a careful, house-by-house census of the island's population. It had shocked me when Charlie had claimed that only 60 people contributed directly and positively to the island's economy. There were now 710 of us living on the island. My preliminary data showed that there were 47 children under age 5, 32 age 5 to 9, 47 between 10 and 15 years old, and 14 that were between 16 and 17. Under children, I had a total of 140. There were 74 boys and 66 girls. None of the children had jobs that made material contributions to the island economy. There were 211 island residents between the age of 18 and 34. Of these, 113 were males and 98 were females. 31 of the males were engaged in productive labor that benefited the island economy. 11 of the females were productive in the economy as well. This meant that 169 people in our prime working age demographic were uninvolved in producing anything that directly contributed to the economy of the island. I was shocked when I saw that number. I wondered how my family could have permitted and allowed something like that to take place. I knew that I had long been one of the residents that was non-productive, but I hadn't realized that I was the norm rather than an exception. I began to see why Charlie had encountered so much trouble balancing the income with the outgo. The 35 to 59 age group contained 346 residents. This consisted of 133 males and 213 females. 21 of the males were productive to the island economy, as were 14 of the females. Again, that meant that 311 in that age group were classified as economically non-productive. There were 13 residents aged 60 or more. Our oldest resident was Granny Torres, who claimed to be 97, but was probably closer to 80 from the ages of her children still living on the island. Tony, her eldest, was 57, and he remembered his mother being a young and pretty woman when he was growing up. The other 12 were 60 to 70, and were all females for some reason. Tony Torres was our oldest resident male at 57 years 9 months of age. None of the eldest residents were economically productive for the island. By my tally, 77 people added to the wealth of the island. That was a better number than Charlie had given me, but that still represented barely more than 10% of our population. I knew all of these people too, and I knew that many of them were close to being self-sufficient in terms of meeting their own food needs and in maintaining their homes and the paths leading from their properties to the central congregating areas of the island. It wasn't all simple black and white numbers that I was dealing with. We had 40 people engaging in our commercial fishing fleet, but there were another 6 that operated the boat that delivered fish to the mainland. Only 2 people grew our tea, but 7 others worked the harvest that occurred several times each year. 5 of the tea harvesters also worked in the fishing industry as well. 3 people tended the tobacco leaf growing, but they grew their tobacco on pieces of land maintained by several other families who didn't participate in the planting, tending, or harvesting. The sugar cane was spread out on one whole side of the island. Many people worked in the cane fields during harvest, but only 5 spent time clearing and burning the fields for later new growth. There probably wasn't a house on the island that didn't have 3 or more machetes that were kept sharp and ready to help with the cane harvests. I had always worked the cane harvest for at least a portion of the cycles. Another fact I unearthed was that our commercial fishing hadn't produced a net operating profit in the past 7 years. Our boats were in degraded shape, and we had no one on our island who was able to perform anything more complicated than simple maintenance on the engines on any of the boats. We had lost a lot of our fishing skills when people who knew their trade had stopped teaching it to our young. More than half of our total workforce was involved in plying a trade that wasn't making us any money. If we used profit as a standard to judge productive labor, we had 27 people engaged in work that returned a profit to the island. I started looking closer at the investment returns that Charlie had been getting. What I found really made me nervous. My father had generated a steady 5% return on average each year. It varied from 4.83% to 5.21% over the 23 years he was in charge of investments. Charlie had averaged just over 13.73% per year. There was no way that I could ever equal that kind of high return, and it would be crazy for me to even attempt it. Charlie was investing in sophisticated leveraged investments where he was separating different components of yields and selling off the separated pieces as desirable strips. He was also trading in energy futures and clean air credits. I had no idea how to do any of that and didn't even have my own checking or savings account. Maggie, can you please come help me with this? I was out in the hall in front of the plantation office when my sister-in-law was walking by. I showed her the notes I'd made detailing Charlie's annual income yields and asked her if she knew how he'd managed to perform so well year after year. That's what he studied in school, Grant. Finance was his main field of study, you know? He was always most confident about that aspect of his stewardship. To him, none of the rest of it made any financial sense. He said it was just as well that we grew tobacco leaf for cigars since we were more communistic than Fidel in Cuba. Have you figured out about the fishing business yet? You mean that it loses money every year? Yeah, I figured that out too. At least we make money with the cane and the tea and the tobacco leaf. Charlie wanted me to tell you that you need to keep the fishing fleet going though because it produces a tax write-off greater than its cash-on-cash losses. Charlie offset all of the gains from the agriculture by the paper losses on the fishing. He said that we eat a lot of the fish that are caught, and they don't count against us as income. Also, the diesel fuel for the fleet is used to power the island generators. Without the fishing, we wouldn't have electricity when we need it. Some of the batteries for the windmills are also part of the fishing fleet components. All of this information made me realize that I had to get greater detail before I could start making meaningful decisions about island economy changes. Well, at least I had a better handle on who wasn't working and producing for the island. The next day, I rode to the mainland when they delivered our fishing catch to the cannery. It was my first time on the mainland, and I'd only ever been to 3 or 4 other small islands before, and that had been when I was out sailing with my father. It was somewhat intimidating seeing how big the city was where we landed, and it only had a population of 70,000. I wondered what New York or Chicago looked like. I went to the unemployment office there and signed up to talk with a counselor. When I explained why I had come to see him, he thought that I was crazy. I assured him that all of the island inhabitants were U.S. citizens and showed him the part I'd read from one of their pamphlets about training programs for the chronically unemployed workers. He took me over and introduced me to a nice lady who was his supervisor. She listened politely to what I had to say, taking notes from time to time, and then told me that they would send out a team to verify my claims on the island. I offered to transport her team round trip for $300, and that included 2-night stay at the plantation. She told me that she'd have to get back to me about that. I gave her our mainland post office box and told her that we only picked up our mail on Tuesdays and Fridays when our fleet delivery boat was in the city. I hurried back to the cannery dock and could see that everyone had been waiting around for me to get back aboard. I didn't get back to the plantation until after 9 that night. I was hungry when I got in and had to knock on Maggie's bedroom door to ask her where some food was that it wouldn't cause a problem for me to eat. She got up and made me 2 nice ham and grilled cheese sandwiches. When she put them down in front of me, I thanked her and bit right into one of them. It was good, and I told her so. She told me that it had been one of Charlie's favorites when he needed to stay up and work late. How did you like the mainland, Grant? Was it truly your first time going there? She sat down at the table with me, and I told her what I'd seen and done over there. After I told her what I had been trying to get accomplished with the unemployment office, Maggie laughed and clapped her hands together. When I told her that I had offered transportation and lodging for $300, I was afraid she would cough up a lung as hard as she was laughing. It took only 2 weeks before the team made arrangement with us to transport them out to the island so that they could conduct field interviews for skilled training placements for 300 of our residents. I selected the 300 that I wanted interviewed and explained to all of them what we were doing and why it needed to be done. I wanted some of our residents to learn new and hopefully valuable skills, but I also wanted to take full advantage of the money that the government was willing to spend to train and retrain workers who came from certain categories of the labor force. I had farm workers, cane harvesters, displaced fishermen, and tobacco industry workers. All 3 of these category of workers was entitled by federal mandate to training and either extended unemployment benefits or training living allowances. I had several buildings that were currently in use that could be leased to the government and used for training, and 9 unused bedrooms in the plantation house that I could rent out nightly to teachers and program administrators. We had 3 boats that were licensed to carry up to 15 passengers with the tickets held by our captains and the certifications of the boats themselves. The interview process took longer than we expected, but we finally managed to get 214 of our applicants accepted in one retraining program or another. I made the state a good offer on 3 training buildings and got a sign lease for 6 of our plantation rooms at $30 per night per room. We served 3 meals per day, and they cost $15 a day. It was a family-style menu, and each guest had to either opt in or take care of his or her own food needs. With all of the rentals, leases, and transports, the island was taking in over $4,000 per week. The residents in training for the various programs were being paid $784 per month per student, and the shortest training program was for 13 weeks. Maggie acted as hostess for the plantation rooms, and we brought in several residents to cook and help with the room cleanups and the linen and towel laundering. Maggie and I jointly decided that we wouldn't take any of the training money from the residents, but that we were going to start charging people for a lot of the things they were ordering from our store. For the first time in our store's 50-year history, it started showing an income. Not a profit, but having an income was a great beginning for us. People started getting used to paying for the things that they wanted or thought they needed. I used some of the money coming in from the unemployment training to get an unemployed marine maintenance and engine mechanic to come over to the island and work on the fleet engines and to help train a few of our residents in marine maintenance. We let him stay in my old shack, and he got his meals with the families of the people he was providing training to. His classroom was whichever boat he was currently working on. All his people seemed to be learning good skills, and our fishing fleet started looking like it might not sink if caught in any type of real seas. I withdrew the old directive that Charlie had issued where the boats had to stay within sight of the island at all times. This allowed the boats to go out to areas where the prospects of a good catch were far better. It didn't seem like it was possible, but all too quickly a year had passed since Charlie had died. Maggie and the children dressed up in their best clothes and went up to the hill and visited Charlie's grave. I had been going up there 2 or 3 times a week, quietly and all by myself, explaining some of my ideas to Charlie and talking about the processes I had gone through to arrive at the decisions I had been making. I knew that Charlie wasn't in a position to hear me, or certainly to make comments or suggestions, but I still wanted to run some of the things by him, if only to get them better organized in my own mind. While I was up there, I decided that it wouldn't hurt anything to let him know about the thoughts I'd been having about Maggie and the future I hoped she and I might have together someday. Maggie had done some other things to let me know that she was available to me if I was interested. I was very interested, but I wanted to wait for the whole year, and to also make sure that she didn't think that I thought I was exercising some right of inheritance with her. She and Charlie had been good together, but I was no Charlie. I waited another week, until the weekend when all the guests had returned back to the mainland for a period of time. I arranged for 2 island women to come over early and get Seamus and Megan and take them down for their first cane harvesting party. I watched from my balcony as the children were led away from the plantation house, and then I got dressed and went down to my office and knocked on those big double doors that connected the 2 rooms. "Come in, Grant." My heart was beating quicker than normal, and I was as nervous as I ever remembered being. There weren't many men still untried and tested with women at my age. I opened the doors and looked over at Maggie, who was lying in her bed, her head and back propped up on several pillows. Her red hair was still piled up in the bun she tied it in when going to bed at night. She was still in her night clothes and had her covers pulled up almost to her neck. She was lovely just like she was. No makeup or other adornments were necessary to make her more beautiful. I knew some of the pleasure Charlie must have felt seeing her like that almost every single morning of his adult life. As I walked over to the side of her bed, I knew that nothing I'd prepared or rehearsed would serve me as I tried to convince her that I was someone who could offer her a better life than what she now enjoyed. I found myself losing the little bit of confidence that I'd managed to build up after reviewing all that had happened in the year since Charlie had died and left me in charge. It was true that we had generated enough in island revenues that we hadn't needed to use any of the meager profits our mainland investments had produced. I generated a whopping 3.03%, more than 10 full percentage points of gain, less than Charlie's career average return. I was no Charlie, but I was sure that Maggie was all too aware of that. "Maggie, I wanted to see you today. I think it's time the 2 of us had a discussion to see if there is some way the 2 of us can be more together." I stopped and waited to see if she would stop me or divert me from stating my case to her. She was still smiling at me, so I took that as a positive sign and started to move further into my plea. "I know that you were used to Charlie, that it was him that you loved and married and made a family together with. I always said that I wanted my own woman, someone who wouldn't feel like she had to settle for less than Charlie." Maggie held up her hand then and stopped me before I could continue on. "Grant, Charlie isn't here. If he were, neither of us would be having this conversation, would we? I'm still here, though, and I don't have to choose between you and Charlie. I'd be choosing between you and whoever else the island might turn up to court me. Who would you say gives you the most competition for the women's affections here on the island, Grant? If I was to answer my own question, I'd be forced to admit that no one does. I'm afraid, though, that you will always try to measure up to the impossibly high standards that you have always attributed to your brother. He warned me that you would do that, you know? When he got sick, he was always talking about how disappointed in him you'd be when you discovered how poorly he'd managed the island's resources. He told me that you'd do a better job because you really knew everyone on the island, and that you'd made all of them your family for your entire life. Charlie could never have done that, Grant. His gift wasn't that broad. The money he made with the mainland investments, it wasn't sustainable, Grant. You saw the risks he was forced to take each year as the other island incomes tapered off. He projected that he'd need to earn 25% annual returns within 2 more years just to not deplete the principal every year. He stood pacing in his office late on many nights, telling me that it just wasn't possible to do. In a year, you've instituted sustainable growth and changes to the economy of the island. You've gotten residents to train and acquire the skills that can produce money to keep our island on a firm economic footing for many years to come. The fishing was profitable, cash on cash, for the first time in many years. The people who live here are looking forward to the coming years, unlike the way it's been for the decade or two before. They have hope that something good is in their futures. Hope is crucial for happiness. I want to live here with you, to help raise Seamus and Megan, and to try to do my best for the people here, our island family. I don't want to be a piece in your life's puzzle, Grant. I need to be a hunger deep inside you that nothing else will satisfy. I need a man with a passion for life. Can you summon up some passion, Grant? I don't know, Maggie. I've never tried to. Charlie told me something else too, Grant, because he knew that you could probably make it to this point, but that then you'd pull back and try to play it safe again. He said that has been your pattern since childhood. He told me to help you get past that one stumbling block that always seemed to stop you from pressing forward with your plans. As she spoke, Maggie shrugged out of her night clothes. I watched her with fascination as she managed somehow to do that while still keeping her covers up so that nothing important got exposed. I'm totally naked now, Grant. Underneath this coverlet, there is no obstruction to what you claim you want. You have to come forward, though, to claim it, because I won't go farther than this. She lay there, supported with her pillows and keeping the comforter secure up to her neck. I wanted to rip off that cover and feast my eyes on her naked body. I wanted to throw off my own clothes and ravish her the way I knew that Charlie would have done. Instead, I stood there thinking of Charlie and knowing that she could never accept me like she'd accepted him. She was staring right at my face, and I knew that she could tell that my passions weren't adequate to the challenge she had issued. I began the slow process of withdrawal, knowing that some things were never meant to be. I'd done all that I was capable of doing. I'd said what I'd come to say and offered her what I had to give. I had been right from the beginning, and that was why I'd never been willing to be the consolation prize for those that preferred Charlie to me. I didn't blame them for preferring him. I just didn't choose to settle for being second choice. I turned away, obeying that tight knot in my stomach that urged me to flee before it got even worse. I made it to the office doors before she called out my name again. You, Grant, I choose you. I turned around and she had thrown off the covers. I drank in all of her loveliness in one giant, visual gulp. She was all that I'd imagined, and then some more. It took several seconds for my feet to turn and head back to the bed. Somehow, I'd shed all of my clothes by the time I managed to crawl into the bed with her. She had chosen me. If she hadn't, she wouldn't have called me and thrown away her covers. I remember starting with her face and kissing her wherever I could manage to reach. I fumbled, I'm sure, not knowing where to pay attention to next. I allowed myself to act and react, forgetting for a time that I had no real idea about how I needed to proceed. I'm sure she helped me all along the way, but that's only because I somehow wound up buried inside her and letting my instincts point me to where I wanted to go. I gave her the passion she'd asked for, more passion than I ever knew I had within me. I heard myself yelling and crying and laughing and moaning as I strove forward to achieve the joining that I'd never before known. There came a time when I simply couldn't move without the exquisite feeling of impending explosion overpowering any thought processes I still was capable of producing. I knew that if I pressed forward that I'd simply explode and cease to exist. There wasn't any way that I could do what I needed to do and still continue breathing. I didn't back away from it, though. I was committed to the end. There wasn't anything on this side that was important enough to stop me from going over to the other side where I needed to be. For the first time in my life, I simply trusted myself and let it all go. After a lifetime of holding back, the letting go was beyond my description capabilities. When I had finished letting go, I knew that I'd be able to do it again now that I'd once discovered how to do it. I love you, Maggie. Thank you for your gift. That was the morning I received Charlie's legacy. He had started planning it for me soon after he found out that he was dying. Somehow he knew that I would always need that big push. His dying pushed me, and then Maggie took that last necessary push to get me to see that I was the one who kept setting up the barriers that no one could ever knock down. She was all that he'd told me she was, and she made me more than I thought I'd ever be. Seamus is on his way back to the island now. His degree is in his hand, and he's coming back with his college sweetheart. He and I will start in by sharing the tasks of running the island. He can do the planning, and I'll look after the implementing of his plans. Maggie and I have 2 children of our own, Alexander and Sophie. Sophie takes after Maggie and is filled with all of life's exuberances. At 10, she already shows promise of being the kind of woman her mother has always been. There is no one on the island that will have the slightest chance of winning her favor, though. Alexander takes after his dad. He rummages around the island, getting into everything he can find. He moved into my old shack when he was 11, and we only see him in passing when he's going to or coming from another island adventure. Maggie doesn't worry about him, and she has the highest of hopes that he'll one day assist Seamus in the caretaking roles that are too much for any one man to handle. I'm starting to think about taking Maggie and Sophie up to New York one of these days. There must be someone up there who has all the requirements to meet Sophie's high standards. I wonder who it is that runs that other island? The one they call Manhattan. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
DNA test reveals my wife cheated on our wedding day with my best friend, leading to ultimate revenge. I'm out of here, I declared. Fine, and don't bother coming back, my wife shot back. Normally I'd toss out a go to hell as I stormed out, but today I aimed for more civilized parting words. We've slung similar barbs over our 14 years hitched, but this time I won't be circling back. In a few days she'll grasp what I meant this round. Over the past half year or so, Jenna, my wife, turned into a verbal wrecking ball. I couldn't figure it. Her jabs, to put it mildly, stung. I started dodging her to keep things from boiling over. Each day, I'd stall longer in the car. Sometimes, I'd slip back home after Jenna and Carrie, our 13-year-old, finished supper. I had to take care of me. Sometimes, there'd be leftovers. Lately, though, it seems they vanished before I return. I go by Kurt Kaminsky. Technically, it's David Kurt Kaminsky, but my old man's also a David, so they dubbed me Kurt from the start to sidestep confusion. Nope, not a junior, Dad's David John Kaminsky. Why he skipped the junior bit, I can't fathom. I'd happily answer to Junior or even DJ, but nope, just Kurt. Or Nat. Yep, I'm Polish. Well, sort of an American with Polish roots. Heard all the jokes, well, most of them. They keep turning out new ones each year. As the lone Pole I know, apart from Dad, in this 10,000-strong town, I've become the punchline. Technically, I'm half Polish. The other half, from Mom's side, is German, French, Irish, and English. But since I'm a Kaminsky, I'm a Pole. My soon-to-be ex-wife ain't who I thought. I only caught wind of this 4 weeks back. As I said, I was keeping clear of her due to the mess. After a few dinners missed, one Monday evening, I hit a diner. In a booth, ready to order, I overheard 2 guys chatting in the next booth. Caught a phrase with Pole and tuned in. So, how long you been with the Pole's missus since they tied the knot? Heck, I even betted her on their wedding day, and he's clueless. The first voice, unknown. But the second, I knew. My best bud, George Carey. I froze. They kept yakking, but I heard zilch until George spilled, "Yeah, we rendezvous at least twice a month." Kurt's so clueless he doesn't even know what's going on. Dumb luck, just then the waitress came to take my order. Quietly, I murmured, "Sorry, got a jet." I bolted, making sure they didn't catch sight of me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Jenna, my wife, with my closest buddy, the guy who stood by me at the altar. He's also my go-to mechanic, and that's not changing anytime soon. Well, not officially my mechanic, more like an exclusive contractor I rely on solely to fix and inspect all my cars. In case you're wondering, I run a used car dealership. Yeah, I'm a used car salesman. Heard all the jokes and jabs, but business is booming. People trust they're getting top-notch cars at fair prices, and if any issues crop up, I handle them. George has always been a top-notch mechanic, and I keep him busy and compensated well. I wanted to bring him on as staff, but he cracked a joke about not respecting himself if he worked for a Pole. Said it in jest, but I sensed he meant it. Still, I took him on as an independent contractor, though he wasn't all that independent. Truth is, I was his sole source of income, and that fact will be his undoing. Leaving the diner, I cruised the streets, doubting what I'd heard. Was it true, or just his boasting? I might have hired a PI, but if what he said was legit, their meetups were sparse. Might end up a waste of cash, but I decided to snoop through her phone and email. Back home, Jenna was her usual self. Fine by me, I needed the truth before talking to her. When she dozed off, I checked her email, clean. Her phone was locked, but it didn't take me long to crack it. Our daughter's birth date. Found a few sketchy messages, but nothing from George. His name in her contacts wasn't odd, considering he was my pal. Maybe he was just talking trash, I thought. Yet her recent behavior hinted something's amiss. Perhaps not with George, but someone else. I hit the hay, restless. It was past 2:43 a.m. when I finally drifted off. The next day at the dealership, George cracked his usual Polish jokes. I usually let them slide, but today I snapped. George, what do you even know about Poland? Bet you couldn't find it on a map if your life depended on it. You joke about Poles being dim, but I'm sure they could locate the U.S., maybe even our state. Get to work. George stared, lost for words. He knew I was on to something. He wasn't the academic type, more street smart, good with engines, not textbooks. I guess that's why we hung out in high school. I'd help him with his studies, ensuring he graduated. Now I'm reconsidering our friendship. He got me thinking about picking a spouse. I retreated to my office, shut the door, and mulled over how to gather evidence. Confronting them both head-on wouldn't fly, they'd just brush it off. I needed solid proof. I rang up a PI in Santa Fe and laid out my worries. He reckoned monitoring them would cost a pretty penny given their sporadic meetups. You could slap a tracker on her phone. At least you'll know its whereabouts when you check. Or set up cameras at home, but unless they're top-notch, and by that I mean pricey, they'll likely get spotted. Even with fancy gear, if she's alert, she'll probably catch on. If I were you, I'd tag her phone and hope to catch them red-handed. He suggested a tracking program and waived off payment. Consider it a freebie, he said. Everything I told you is online anyway. Still, you came through with valuable advice. Expect a check, I insisted. If you ever swing by Silver City, drop by Kaminsky's lot, he offered. I don't usually venture out that way, but if I do, I'll look you up, I replied, and I sensed he meant it. A big part of my sales success came from making folks feel important. Early on, I learned folks crave validation. I opted for the tracking software, saving cash and hassle on cameras Jenna might spot. That night, when everyone was out cold, I sneaked up and installed the tracking app on her phone, syncing it with mine. It'll run in the background, unbeknownst to her. Finally, I slept soundly. The next day at work, I kept tabs on the app. Jenna worked part-time at the uni bookstore, 15 to 20 hours a week. She called her earnings mad money and splurged at the salon. She hit the grocery store and later was back home. George was home most of the day, but whenever Jenna was in, he was out working, so at least for that day, I figured nothing had gone down. That evening, I tried being more civil to my wife and daughter, suggesting dinner out. My wife seemed somewhat responsive. Our daughter, typical teen, hesitated, but I insisted. Dinner went smoothly. I casually brought up George, and Jenna shifted uncomfortably, swiftly changing the subject, fueling my suspicions. I want to find out if George's words hold water. I've got to get to the bottom of this somehow. That night, I refrained from checking her phone. My attempts to peek at her calls or texts came up empty. Either she swiftly deleted them or didn't make any at all. Climbing into bed, I thanked Jenna. Thanks for joining us for dinner. Thank you, Kurt. It was a nice surprise, she replied, meeting my gaze. You might be in luck tonight. It's been a while, and like I mentioned, we haven't been getting along lately. After her usual nightly routine in the bathroom, Jenna nestled beside me. I felt conflicted about the possibility of closeness with her. If she had been unfaithful, did I even want it? I resolved to let her take the lead. Until I had solid evidence, I wouldn't initiate. We did end up being physically engaged, but it was rather ordinary, no need for specifics. Well, at least I enjoyed it. Throughout the week, I kept tabs on her phone's location, finding nothing out of the ordinary. On Saturday night, while she slept, I checked her phone for any messages or calls, yet again finding nothing. I was close to convincing myself that George was just blowing smoke, trying to impress someone with his tales of conquests. This wasn't the first time I'd known him to do so since our school days. I tossed and turned in bed once more, my subconscious refusing to let me sleep. At 2 a.m., I lay there, staring at the ceiling, unable to drift off. I decided to go downstairs for a drink, hoping it might help me relax. Sitting with a glass of Jack Daniels and Coke in one hand and her phone in the other, I decided to check it once more. Entering the password, our daughter's birth date, I opened her phone to the home page. Suddenly, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. Our daughter's birth date was the key. Jenna's pregnancy had been challenging. We had feared losing her several times due to complications. There was an issue with her Rh factor not matching Jenna's, causing her body to reject the baby. Jenna spent the last 3 weeks of the pregnancy on bed rest to ensure the baby's safe delivery, and indeed, Carrie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. We were overjoyed at her health, but she proved to be a demanding child. She cried incessantly, had trouble sleeping, and struggled with nursing. It was tough going. In Carrie's second year, Jenna firmly declared we weren't having another child. It saddened me, but truthfully, the baby had drained much of the joy from our lives. I mentioned that she was born 9 months after our wedding. They call such children wedding night babies because they're conceived on that night or during the honeymoon. A light bulb went off in my head. If George's claims were true, then there was a strong chance Jenna was already pregnant before our wedding night. Jenna was on the pill. No, we didn't wait until marriage to be physically engaged. It was a significant part of our relationship. The doctor speculated that the stress of the wedding might have interfered with her hormones, rendering the pills ineffective. Well, if the pills failed that night, they likely failed that day too. Now I know what to do. There's a 50 to 50% chance I'm not the father. You know the saying, the early bird gets the worm. Well, George might have been an early bird, but in his case it seems the early worm gets the birdie. I got off the couch and headed to the bathroom where I found some cotton swabs. Carrie was fast asleep in her room. She finally settled into a good sleep routine at 4 years old. Before that, it was a struggle. She lay there snoring with her mouth open. It was simple to gently swab the inside of her cheek with a Q-tip. She didn't even stir. After sealing it in a plastic bag, I repeated the process for myself. Even if Carrie turned out to be my biological daughter, it still left questions about Jenna's faithfulness. If she wasn't, but I pushed those thoughts aside for later consideration. Sunday was for chores, and we each had our tasks. I took my time, avoiding Jenna and Carrie, to keep my emotions in check. I was anxious to confirm my suspicions, but plagued by doubt all day. "Something on your mind, Kurt?" Jenna inquired. I needed a quick answer, so I replied, "I'm planning to buy a bunch of cars at the next auction to stock up the lot. Money might be tight until I make some sales." "Just don't overextend," she advised, always referring to the business as ours, though it was really mine. I'd say, set it up as a separate entity to protect my personal finances. Living in a religious community, I didn't want business decisions to affect my personal life negatively. "I'm thinking of paying off the credit cards and keeping only one open to improve our credit," I told her. It was a tactic to mask my strategy in case she found out about it later. "Do what you think is best," she responded indifferently. The idea came to me in a flash. It's amazing what your mind can do when you let it. This would minimize fallout if my suspicions proved true. So, bright and early Monday, I took the samples to Western New Mexico University and spoke with someone in the science department. They directed me to the department head, who welcomed the opportunity. I handed over some business cards and offered a 10% discount to anyone working on the samples. He seemed appreciative. "I've been eyeing a new car to replace my Camry. I might swing by and check out your selection. If nothing catches my eye, I'll work with you to find something," I mentioned. "Thank you, I'll keep that in mind," he replied. As I left the university, I knew I wore a smile, but it was tinged with worry. The test results could spell the end of my marriage. When I mentioned buying new cars to Jenna, it was merely a cover-up for my troubled thoughts, yet the idea started to grow on me. I summoned Paul, my accountant, loan officer, and occasional salesperson, into my office and shared my plans. "We're going to make this work," I assured him. "There's something else, Paul," I continued. "I want to clear the mortgage on my house. Can we work out a lump sum payment?" "Let me crunch the numbers and get back to you after lunch," he replied, exiting my office. As he left, I pondered contacting my lawyer for a family law referral. But then I hesitated, thinking, hold your horses. Let's see the results first. I've yet to find concrete evidence of infidelity. After lunch, Paul presented the spreadsheet and we discussed the next moves for both plans. The following 2 days dragged on, each moment filled with anticipation for the DNA test results. Late Wednesday evening, the department head phoned, confirming the outcome and arranging a visit to discuss the car. When he arrived, I ushered him into my office. His expression said it all before he even spoke. "The samples aren't related," he confirmed. I nodded, though the news hit hard, even though I'd half expected it. He gave me a moment before handing over the envelope with the results. When I glanced back up, my demeanor shifted. "So, about that car you were eyeing," I inquired. "Well, it might sound cliché, but I've hit the big 50 and I'm eyeing a sports car." "Thinking of a Mazda Miata," he shared. Though I didn't have one in stock, I promised to scour the auction the next day for a well-kept one. "I'll ring you this afternoon with any updates," I assured him as he left. "I've told Anna I might leave early, but I'll be reachable if needed," I thought to myself, knowing she wouldn't call. She rarely required my assistance. She handled most tasks herself. As I drove around the city, everything seemed different. I made a call to my lawyer, who, though saddened by the news, directed me to a colleague he trusted. After the call, I booked an evening appointment. The next day, over a snack at a restaurant, I reflected, have I truly squandered the past 15 years? I couldn't even claim to have a child from this marriage. While I still regarded her as my child to some extent, biologically, she wasn't mine. What to do next? I couldn't pretend ignorance anymore. I'd been aware before, but now there was no turning back. One thing I was certain of, George would face consequences. It didn't matter that he'd been my closest friend for years. With friends like him, enemies seemed preferable. Jenna, too, would face repercussions. I wondered if she was aware that Carrie wasn't mine. Even if she wasn't, she kept this truth hidden from me, the secret of her infidelity on our wedding day with my best man, my supposed friend. Now I had no reason to doubt what I'd overheard. She indulged with him at least twice monthly. Anger began to well up inside me, and before it spiraled out of control, I knew I needed solitude, away from everyone. I should have called Jenna, informing her I wouldn't be home that evening. Going home was out of the question. I feared I might do something that would land me in jail. She picked up the call. "Hello, Kurt. Hey, I'll be spending the night in Albuquerque to prep for the auction tomorrow at 8. "Oh," I responded flatly. "Well, okay then. Have a safe trip." I rarely ventured to Albuquerque for auctions, so this deviation was notable. I wondered if she'd exploit my absence for the night. She'd have to come up with an excuse regarding Carrie for my parents, which wouldn't be easy to explain. Nevertheless, I'd intermittently check her phone tracker throughout the evening to see if she ventured elsewhere. I navigated the roads to Albuquerque, aiming to purchase at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata. I'd arranged for their pickup and delivery to my lot post-auction. Now the dilemma was who to entrust for their mechanical inspection. I knew George wouldn't get any further business from me once his current routine inspections and repairs were done. Upon hearing I'd acquired 24 cars, he'd likely envision dollar signs and inflate his charges, but that wasn't going to happen. I'd keep it under wraps until the last minute. I needed to consult with a local auction dealer to identify someone skilled and dependable to inspect them before shipping to our small town. Arriving in Albuquerque around 9 a.m., I checked into a Best Western hotel. Despite being the owner, I couldn't justify splurging on an expensive hotel using company funds. The room was comfortable, as was the bed, just what I needed. I'm a simple person with simple needs. Upon entering the room, I immediately checked Jenna's phone tracker, discovering she was still at home, or at least her phone was. Sleep proved elusive that night. I couldn't shake off thoughts about her actions and motivations. How could she justify her affair, especially on our wedding day, and continue it for who knows how long? I started to reassess our marriage. It was never perfect, but I believed in our exclusive love. Now, I realized it was a mistake from the very beginning. In the initial years following the wedding, things weren't smooth sailing. Naturally, we didn't anticipate a baby right away. Our original plan was to wait 3 to 4 years before starting a family. We had agreed on having 3 children before tying the knot. However, Carrie's arrival disrupted these plans. Learning that my best friend was the cause of this disruption made all the struggles seem futile. 14 years of effort seemed wasted, despite the good times we'd had being overshadowed by this revelation. If Jenna hadn't been involved with George, perhaps she would have conceived with me. Maybe her pregnancy wouldn't have been as difficult, and we wouldn't have had such a challenging child, leading her to not desire more children. George shattered my life when he seduced my future wife on our wedding day. Now he entertains her at least twice a month, all the while likely mocking me, the oblivious Pole. He must face consequences, I thought, as I lay down, attempting to calm myself and drift off to sleep. Anger simmered within me once more. I needed to regain composure or risk a sleepless night. I turned on the TV to watch a mindless comedy show. Laughter helped soothe my nerves, and I was ready to doze off, looking ahead to a busy day. The auction went smoothly. I snagged some excellent cars at favorable prices and networked with dealers in the Albuquerque area. Spotting no Miatas at the auction, I inquired with other dealers. 2 of them had one each, one red and the other black. I negotiated potential deals pending confirmation of my client's preferred color. Naturally, both dealers agreed, assuring me they'd handle the transaction. Once I provided details of the cars on my lot, I should have frequented this auction more often. Interacting with fellow businessmen in the same industry inspired me to expand my operations and provided a welcome distraction from my personal troubles. Later in the afternoon, during my meeting with the lawyer, the news wasn't encouraging. I faced losing half of my assets, along with alimony and child support payments for a child who wasn't even mine. In that moment, I decided against pursuing a divorce. Instead, I resolved to leave her with George's child, paying off the mortgage on the house. She could remain there, but with only my name on the mortgage, she wouldn't be able to sell it. By continuing to cover taxes and utilities while living elsewhere, she wouldn't have the option to resign and claim the house. However, I needed to make a decision regarding my business. Although it was registered as a corporation, I had a gut feeling that without proper protection, I could risk losing it. Consulting my business lawyer became a priority. Arriving home utterly exhausted from a demanding day, I informed Jenna of my fatigue. "I'm beat, planning to shower and hit the sack," I muttered, making my way to the bedroom. "Want dinner?" she inquired. "No, had a late lunch," I replied. At least she cared enough to ask. The shower was blissful, almost like my troubles were washing away. While problems persisted, I found solace in devising solutions. Minutes after my head hit the pillow, sleep enveloped me. The past week had been stressful, but with a plan in motion, I finally found mental reprieve. Rising early, feeling rejuvenated, I headed to the office before Jenna and Carrie stirred. There, amid spreadsheets and financial reports, I orchestrated my next moves. I briefed Paul on the 23 car purchases and instructed Anna to cease assigning work to George, emphasizing the need for secrecy. She eyed me quizzically. "You're the boss," she remarked. "Thank you, Anna. You're invaluable." At 9 sharp, I phoned my business lawyer seeking advice. "Your business is registered, but she might still force a sale to claim half its value. Consider selling preemptively," he suggested. "I can't. It's my life," I retorted. "Let me mull it over and get back to you by week's end." This news hit hard. I'd poured sweat and tears into building my business, akin to raising a child. Unlike Carrie, I thought bitterly, rage threatened to consume me again, but as a seasoned businessman, I knew to compartmentalize. I refocused on my business agenda. First up, contacting Doug, who confirmed George's claims. "Doug, Kurt Kaminsky here. I've got intel on 2 Miatas you might fancy, red and black. Still interested?" "If the price is right," he replied. "Which color do you prefer?" "Let me show you both." "We'll crunch numbers afterward. Even if we can't agree, I can sell it easily," I assured. "And your pick?" he pressed. "Red makes a bold statement but fades faster. Black's elegant but heats up quickly here. Planning to garage it?" "Yes," he affirmed. "Red it is then. When can we meet?" "Monday or Tuesday." "Perfect. Call upon arrival. Deal." After hanging up, I dialed the dealer with the red Miata to negotiate a swap. He showed interest in the BMW sitting on my lot for 3 months, recognizing its better prospects in a larger city. Meanwhile, George showed up with several cars still awaiting repairs. As an independent contractor, his flexible schedule suited my needs, despite my simmering anger toward him. Overhearing salesmen discussing the impending arrival of 23 cars, George inquired about the schedule. "Hey Kurt, when are these cars from the auction coming in? I want to plan my repairs," he queried. "The auction house will handle the delivery, likely late next week or early the following," I informed him tersely, struggling to keep calm in the presence of this betrayer. I managed to chuckle as he departed. That weekend, I distanced myself from Jenna, occupying myself with yard work and errands. Checking her phone tracker no longer concerned me. I harbored only contempt for her. Raising another man's child felt unforgivable. Monday found me back at the car show. I arranged to trade the BMW for the Miata, setting off to Albuquerque to finalize the deal. "We'll grab lunch upon your arrival," the dealer suggested. Informing Anna of my day-long absence, I instructed her to hold the fort. "Got it, boss," she affirmed, her reliability shining through. A raise was in order. The journey and lunch were pleasant, forging a new camaraderie with the dealer. Driving back in the Miata, wind tousling my hair, I relished the freedom. Deciding to splurge further, I resolved to procure a black car, realizing I didn't need more than a 2-seater. Soon, I pulled into our driveway in a fiery red sports car. Jenna glanced out the window and exchanged words with Carrie, prompting them both to step outside to observe. "Why do you need this car, honey?" "We need something with a back seat for Carrie," she remarked patronizingly. "Just picked it up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to take a ride," I responded. "No, honey, I'm not a fan of small cars," Jenna retorted with a hint of disdain. "Carrie," I called, motioning for my daughter to join us. "No, Dad, I'm already teased enough because of my last name. I don't want to be seen with a Polish used car salesman. Her words stung, typical of a teenager's bluntness. I was taken aback. Where did this disrespect come from? Glancing at Jenna, I realized she was treating Carrie's remark as inconsequential. Now both the women in my house were showing disrespect. Teenagers might not always be close with their parents, but the hurtful manner in which she spoke made me question the authenticity of my family life. I'm going for another drive. I'll be back soon, I announced, shifting the car into reverse and driving off. Fueled by frustration, I navigated the roads of Silver City until I returned home around 9:30, heading straight upstairs. I took a quick shower and crawled into bed. When I didn't emerge from the shower, Jenna entered the room, casting a bright light into my eyes. Squinting, I closed my eyes. Are you sulking because we didn't choose a sports car? Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not just Polish, you're childish, she chided. Her sudden attitude shift puzzled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it stemmed from George. Spending time with him had seemingly influenced her disregard for my heritage, now passed on to our daughter. Yet she wasn't even my daughter. Despite supporting her, I needed to accept that fact. Looks like you and your daughter would rather do without a pole around, so you might as well just leave, I retorted heatedly. Her demeanor only fueled my anger. She would regret treating me this way. From then on, the atmosphere in the Kaminsky household grew cold and silent. The following day, I contacted Doug, who came over to inspect the Miata. He was thrilled with it. After discussing the numbers, he was pleasantly surprised by the great deal he received, less than Kelly Blue Book. As he was finishing up the paperwork, he mentioned, "My best friend handles purchasing for the university, and we rotate about cars every 2 years. It might not be much, but could you speak with him?" "Always happy to do business, and I'll ensure he gets a good deal," I replied. "I'll have Jim reach out to you by the end of the week." "Thank you," I said. That's how I expanded my business, by treating people well and showing appreciation for their referrals. On Wednesday, my lawyer called. "Hey Kurt, I think I have a solution to your potential issue. Can you swing by this afternoon to discuss it?" "Absolutely. I'm eager to get started." The tension at home had become unbearable. At the meeting later that day, I heard the plan and was pleased with it. It would take about 2 weeks to execute, but if successful, it would be worth it. Over those 2 weeks, I gradually moved personal items and tools from my house to an apartment nearby. Meanwhile, George awaited the arrival of the 24 cars to do some work, but I kept delaying him. During the past weekend, I did some yard work and cleared out my closet and drawers when Jenna and Carrie weren't around. Jenna did laundry during the week, so she didn't notice the emptiness of my closet. This brings me back to that Monday night when I told Jenna, "I'm leaving." She once again began to show rudeness and disrespect, targeting me for being Polish and a used car salesman. In the past, I would go to a motel for a night or two, depending on my level of anger. The following Tuesday morning, I arrived at the parking lot early and gathered my employees in the conference room. It was a regular weekly meeting, so nothing seemed unusual. I began, "Good morning. As you all know, the cars I purchased a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday afternoon. They've all been inspected and prepped, ready for sale. We won't be using George for any more work here. If he asks, just say we're going in a different direction. You've all been fantastic. You're like family to me, so it's tough to discuss what's next." Pausing to wipe a tear, I continued, "I've sold the business." Surprised, they looked at me, "But nothing changes regarding your roles except Anna, who will take on some of my duties and receive a corresponding raise." Despite their astonishment, they began congratulating Anna, recognizing her hard work and worthiness. "Anna, please come talk to me after the meeting. There are some things we need to discuss," I said. "I'll still be involved in the company, but only in an advisory capacity and may occasionally sell. I don't want to interfere with your sales," I assured her. They were all relieved that I'd still be around, even if only occasionally. After the meeting, as we exited, George stood there. "Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting?" he asked, surprised. "Because it was for staff only and you're not an employee," I explained. He seemed taken aback. "I see the cars have arrived. I'll get to work on them," he said. "No need. They've already been prepared for sale," I replied firmly, leaving him stunned. "But I always check the cars," he protested. "George, I've sold the business, and the new owner wants to go in a different direction," I informed him, holding back my anger. "I'll save that for another day." I kept it brief, realizing sometimes less is more. "I can't believe you sold the business," he exclaimed, making it about himself. "Or what now?" "You can pick up your check for the past 2 weeks' work. It wasn't much. Anna rarely utilized your services," I stated bluntly. He'd been expecting to work on the cars, but he was out of luck. I felt no sympathy. I just wished I could tell him what I really thought of him. When I spoke with Anna, I asked her to keep our conversation confidential. Of course, Kurt, I'll never divulge anything you don't want, she assured me. Here's the plan. I've set up companies registered in Nevada. One buys the parking lot, the other buys the company. I own all the shares in both. Eventually, I'll divorce Jenna and ensure she doesn't get the business. Why? She asked. I've moved out. Jenna doesn't know yet, but I'm not going back. She had an affair with George. In fact, Carrie isn't my daughter. I suspect she's George's. I'm not sure if Jenna knows, let alone George. They'll find out soon. I won't divorce, but I'll keep paying utilities and taxes for our house, so she can't claim abandonment and take everything. If she files for divorce, I don't want her to take over the business. That's why I agreed to the company being bought twice. Let them figure it out. The proceeds will be spent by the time she gets the divorce done. Plus, I barely make anything from consulting and a few commissions. Anna, you can handle daily operations. I'll be available for questions, but I trust you and your judgment, I explained. Anna smiled at the news of the new owner, but when she heard about Jenna and George, her expression turned deadly serious. This woman was someone I deeply admired and respected. I have one more task for you before I go. I need you to order a new sign and letterhead. We're changing the business name to Helpless Car. This will reinforce the idea to George and Jenna that the business is under new ownership, I explained. I spelled out the name to ensure she got it right. She looked puzzled. I'll explain the name choice someday. For now, just know it tells the whole story, I told her. Though she seemed puzzled, she trusted me enough to follow through with that. I bid farewell to everyone and headed out. I got into my Audi and drove towards Albuquerque. About 2 hours later, I received a call from Jenna. I hadn't expected her to call so soon. This was a familiar pattern. I'd leave for a day or two, she'd call, we'd talk, and I'd return. Things would change briefly, then revert to how they were before. We'd have another argument, and the cycle would repeat. I decided to answer the call, curious to hear what she would say this time. Hello, I spoke through the car's speakerphone. Kurt, what's going on? She asked, sounding hesitant. Nothing much, just heading to Albuquerque, I replied flatly. Why are you going there? She inquired. To pick up the car, I stated without emotion. So what I heard must not be true. George must have called you, figuratively speaking. Perhaps he asked your mistress what's going on with her husband, she speculated. I don't know, I responded. What did you hear? She pressed. George called and said you sold the business, she revealed. Why would he call you? I questioned, perplexing her. She corrected herself. Heck, your best friend. He was curious if I knew. Best friend, what a joke. I was a joke to him. The silly Pole, clueless about what's happening with his own wife behind his back. Apparently, my family felt embarrassed that I was a used car salesman, so yes, I sold the business. Now you won't have to bear that stigma anymore. Shouldn't we have discussed this first? She worried, likely concerned about our livelihood. This is my company. I owned it before we got married, and I can sell it whenever I want. I just hope the new owner treats my former employees well. Did you get a good price for it? She fretted about her standard of living. I didn't care. I just knew I needed a change. I'll start job hunting after I take some time off to relax. What about the mortgage? She panicked. I used the money to pay off the house. You only need to worry about utilities and taxes now. What about food, gas, insurance? She almost hysterically asked. Guess I overlooked those. Do you think you could work more hours? I suggested. When are you coming home? This was the moment of truth. She pressed. I won't return, I said casually. Remember what you said when I left that evening? Don't worry, I'll figure out how to cover the bills so the power won't be shut off. You can't do this, Kurt. You need to come back, she pleaded, desperation evident in her voice. No, I really don't want to, I responded impassively. Kurt, please don't do this, she cried. I've already made my decision. What about your daughter? She tried to appeal to my emotions. You mean Carrie? The girl who's ashamed of her last name and the fact that her old man is or was a used car salesman? Kurt, she's just a year-old girl. You can't take this to heart, I retorted. Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I won't be back. Again, so none of you will be embarrassed by me. With those words, I hung up and powered off the phone, letting her contemplate. I knew she'd try calling me back and grow frustrated when I didn't answer. After calming down from the call, I tried to enjoy the leisurely drive to Albuquerque. I assumed her next move would be to contact her lover for more information and to relay what I'd said. Upon reaching my destination, I switched my phone back on and noticed 5 missed messages. I listened to them, 3 from Jenna, 1 from George, and 1 from Anna. I immediately dialed Anna. Hi Anna, sorry my phone was off. I've been getting unwanted calls, I explained. Yes, I know. Your wife and George called me to find out where you were. I told them you don't own this place anymore, so you won't be coming back. Hope everything is okay, Anna informed me. Great, I replied. If they hassle you too much, tell them you'll call the police for phone harassment. I like that, she said. Kurt, you might feel like you don't have family or friends anymore, but trust me, you do. We're your family and always will be. Thank you, Anna. You know just what to say. I hope your husband realizes how lucky he is, I remarked. Trust me, he does. He tells me all the time. Never take that for granted, she assured me. I won't, I promised. After ending the call, I debated whether to call my unfaithful wife or that idiot. Nah, let them stew. Exiting the Audi, I entered the parking lot office where the owner awaited. I have that Audi I mentioned. Interested in discussing a swap, he proposed. Let's see. He admired the car's condition, inside, out, and under the hood. I could sell it in a week. Are you sure about the exchange? Feels like I'm getting the better end. You can return the favor sometime, he suggested. I'm not here to profit, just want a sports car, I replied. 30 minutes later, back on the road, top down, relishing the ride. Now, where to? North sounded good, so off to Santa Fe. Over the next 2 weeks, I journeyed through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado. I stayed close in case Anna needed me. I checked in with her a few times, and once things seemed settled, I headed west. Of course, they kept calling at first, annoyance, then apologies, finally, hints of resentment. I listened but shrugged it off. When they reported my canceled credit card, I chuckled. George even called, branding me a villain for leaving Jenna and Carrie. I chuckled some more. My lawyer texted me. Jenna threatened legal action if I didn't return. I returned his call. Hello, Kurt speaking. So, my wife made threats to you? Yes, but if you're still paying on the house, don't worry. She'll struggle to prove it. I assured him, I can offer something better. I have a recording where I declare my departure, and she insists I don't come back. It's gold. Send it my way, he requested. If she causes any trouble, I'll take it to her lawyer. Let them sort it out. Thanks. I'll check in next week to see how it's going. I roamed the Southwest. The Miata wasn't the coziest, but it was a blast. Caught glances, even a few flashes from bored middle-aged women, but I wasn't seeking that. After all, I was still hitched, no matter what. Drove to Reno, then Lake Tahoe, the coast, Napa Valley, and zigzagged along Highway 1, Yosemite, San Diego, Death Valley, to Vegas, then Phoenix. No rush. Chatted with folks in parking lots. Some envied a guy in his 30 seconds who could just hit the road. After approximately 3 months and covering 8,000 miles, I opted to head back to Silver City. Upon arrival at Helpless Auto, I was warmly welcomed by my entire team, including a few new faces. They all expressed joy at my return. Stepping into Anna's office, formerly mine, she looked up, spotting me. Her smile widened even more. Rising from her chair, she walked around her desk and gave me a tight hug. After chatting for a bit, I inquired, do you think I can treat everyone to food and drinks at Wrangler's? Can you close the store by 5? It was already 3. Absolutely, I'll make sure of it. The whole team will be there. After bidding them farewell and announcing our meeting in 2 hours, I left them in high spirits. Next, I paid a visit to my lawyer. During my travels, he informed me that Jenna had attempted to claim abandonment to seize my assets, but he managed to thwart her efforts. We discussed our next steps. At 5, I joined the team at Wrangler Restaurant. We enjoyed a fantastic dinner, and it was delightful catching up with everyone. As the evening wound down, they began to depart, leaving only Anna and me. She gazed at me and said, You know, Kurt, you might feel powerless and lost, but you're mistaken. You simply placed trust in those you loved. I met her gaze. So you figured it out? Yes, it took some time, but your mention of the new name telling the whole story lingered in my mind until I grasped it. You may be Polish, but those jokes never truly define you. They insult your heritage and who you are. Thank you, Anna. You're the primary reason I returned. I had to witness how you handled my responsibilities. I'm pleased to say you haven't filled my shoes, you forged your own path. I had an exceptional mentor, she expressed gratitude. We embraced, and then she departed to her husband, who appeared genuinely content. I headed back to the apartment I hadn't visited in 3 months. The air was stale, necessitating some ventilation. Opening the windows, I allowed the refreshing evening breeze to permeate the rooms. I grabbed a beer and settled on the terrace overlooking the pool. Several people were swimming, and a family was enjoying themselves nearby. My mind drifted to Jenna and me. We once harbored lofty aspirations and dreams when we tied the knot. Now they seem to have vanished. Glancing at the wall clock, I noted it was around 8:30. A realization struck me it was time for a confrontation. I rose, hopped into my Miata and drove to my house, technically still mine since I purchased it before marrying Jenna, and my name was the only one on the deed. Disappointment washed over me as I pulled into the driveway. The yard was unkempt. It appeared the landscaping had been neglected. The porch light was on, indicating Jenna was likely home. I approached the door and knocked. After a moment, Carrie answered. Her eyes widened as she greeted me. Dad? Hi, Carrie. Is your mom home? She stuttered before yelling, Mother. From the kitchen, I heard Jenna's tense, high-pitched voice. What's the matter? Carrie continued to stare at me and loudly exclaimed, Dad! Jenna appeared from around the corner, spotting me, and shrieked, Where are you going? I opted to respond calmly to her outcry. Traveling, I stated evenly. Just then, George emerged from the bedroom in his underwear. Oh, I remarked, the whole family is here, Mom, Dad, and child. What the hell are you talking about? Jenna retorted sharply. I guess George has stepped in to fill my role. After all, it's rightfully his, I remarked. Jenna appeared puzzled, while Carrie's tone turned visibly enraged. Actually, young lady, you seem to be misinformed, I interjected, knowing she disliked being corrected. George never worked for me by his own choice, so I couldn't have fired him. Regarding bills, all utilities and car insurance are covered. Jenna interrupted. What about groceries and gas for the car? You had a job, did you lose it? It used to cover expenses while I was away. Do you think you can just waltz back in and take over? Jenna challenged. No, I'll wait until you and your partner find somewhere else to live. It was clear they were staying together in my house, and Carrie seemed fine with it. Jenna retorted, I'm not leaving my home. Correction, this is my home. It was mine before we married, and only my name is on the deed, I asserted. You left, so now it's mine, Jenna insisted. That's not how the law works. Since I cover the utilities and taxes, I remain the legal owner. Even though I've been away briefly, it's still mine. Don't worry, I'll give you until the end of next month to find a new place. Just make sure you take your daughter with you. What do you mean, your daughter? She's our daughter, Jenna protested. You couldn't have said it more accurately, I chuckled. Jenna looked confused. Turning to Carrie, I disclosed, Carrie, I know you dislike being called Polish, so here's some news. Your real father isn't me. It's George. Silence enveloped the room. After a moment, Jenna whispered, What? Yes, Jenna. It seems your carelessness on our wedding day resulted in a child, but not mine. However, it's good news for you, Carrie. You can now take your real father's last name and become Carrie George's daughter. I wonder if perhaps Mom chose the name Carrie out of respect for her lover, I pondered aloud. Jenna and George exchanged looks, the color draining from his face. What about you, George? Don't you want to step up as a father? Well, that's unfortunate. It's time to take responsibility. But look at the bright side, it's just 4 more years until college, I remarked. Jenna and George nearly echoed each other. I don't believe this. With a swift motion, I handed them the DNA report. See for yourselves. They snatched it, glanced at it, and then both collapsed. Carrie, inform the Lovebirds that your mom will be served with divorce papers next week, along with an eviction notice, I instructed. Before walking away. Throughout my absence, I couldn't shake the thought of whether this affair had been ongoing during our marriage. Did she choose me, or was I just a pawn? I felt utterly helpless, ignorant, and vulnerable. George had mocked me behind my back and even cracked Polish jokes to my face. Back at the apartment, I drowned my thoughts in beer. The next morning, I visited the lawyer to initiate the paperwork. Despite knowing I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, being a barely working person meant I wouldn't owe alimony or child support, especially with another man in my place. Or at least, that's what I hoped for. The betrayal by Jenna and George was devastating. Rebuilding trust, whether with a man or woman, would be a daunting task. Perhaps I should consider therapy. As the divorce proceedings commenced, I returned to work at the dealership, emphasizing to my colleagues that I was no longer the boss and only needed 1 sale per week to cover my expenses. I even insisted on just 1. When faced with court-ordered child support, I ensured that my bank accounts were emptied, leaving only enough for my basic needs. At month's end, Jenna hired a lawyer, though I questioned how she could afford one. Perhaps he worked pro bono. Regardless, they'd be in for a surprise. Despite scrutinizing my accounts and the sale itself, they failed to uncover anything substantial. I learned from my colleagues that during my absence, George visited the dealership almost daily for the first 2 weeks, trying to secure work from Anna. However, she consistently turned him down. Eventually, he gave up. Now he regretted not obtaining his ASC certification, as his only job prospect was at Valine doing quick oil changes for $13 an hour. I hoped Jenna would work full-time, or they'd struggle financially. I contacted the realtor and notified Jenna that I was listing the house for sale, anticipating a 50-50th split of our assets. Since she had already received an eviction notice, she needed to vacate before the sale closed. One evening, Jenna knocked on my door and I reluctantly let her in. "What do you want?" "Kurt, can we talk?" she asked. "I'm not sure it's a good idea. We're in a legal battle," I replied. "Come on, Kurt, it's just us, no lawyers. Can we have a civil conversation?" she pleaded. "All right, but let's go to Denny's," I suggested. "There'll be witnesses," I thought to myself. I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. At Denny's, after exchanging pleasantries, I asked, "Why, Jenna?" She hesitated before answering. "I guess the simple answer is that I liked both of you and couldn't choose." "So you were seeing both of us at the same time?" I questioned. Jenna looked down and admitted yes, but George warned me not to tell you because he knew it would ruin your relationship with him. "Then why did you say yes when I proposed?" I inquired. "Because I loved you and George," she replied. "I loved him too, but I knew he wouldn't make a good husband, so we ended things when you proposed, and I focused on us and our wedding plans." "So, on our wedding day, you were with him?" I probed. Jenna started crying and confessed, "Yes, everything was a mess then." "What was it?" I pressed further. "I didn't want to lose him, and he didn't want to lose me," she admitted. "Well, now you have each other and your child. By the way, you did a great job with the name. I didn't even realize until later during my travels that Carrie wasn't yours," I revealed. Jenna looked at me and said, "Kurt, I still love you." "It's nice to hear, Jenna, but I'm not sure you understand what love truly means," I replied. "I loved you more than anything, and clearly you can't say the same." "I loved you," she retorted, "but now I feel nothing but contempt," I stated firmly. Jenna realized our relationship was over. There would never be an us again. Before she left, I had to ask one final question. "Have you ever stopped?" After hesitating, she decided to tell the truth. "We never ceased. We had our quiet times, but we typically met twice a month," she admitted. I was hoping for a different response, but I appreciated her honesty. "One more thing, about a year ago, your behavior towards me changed." "What triggered it?" I inquired. Her face flushed red, then she grew slightly angry. "George started pushing for a bacchanalia, not involving you. I might have considered it if you were involved, but we couldn't navigate it. His persistence made me resent you for something I knew you wouldn't agree to. It's odd, but I thought I could have both of my men together and resented you for not being open to it," she confessed. "Did you go through with it?" I asked. "No, I contemplated it, but then you left and everything fell apart," she admitted. "Well, now you're free to pursue it. Your choices don't affect me anymore," I remarked. Sensing our conversation was concluding, I settled the bill and we headed to our cars. 4 months later, we stood before a judge and finalized our divorce. George was present too. Exiting the courthouse, Jenna suggested, "Maybe we can grab a drink, the traditional way." "Certainly," I agreed. Despite the previous animosity, it had dissipated. Then I thought, this marks the end of my association with them. They can now be together. Let them wallow in their own mess, they deserve each other. Ha! Jenna will have to adjust to a lower standard of living. All right, maybe the resentment hasn't completely faded, despite being Polishi demand respect.
I never imagined I'd find myself facing a life without my wife. It seemed so unlikely, so unlike her. Shelley and I had built our lives together, from college sweethearts to parents of 2 amazing kids. We navigated hardships, celebrated successes, and created countless memories over more than 20 years. It's hard to grasp how quickly things can fall apart when you've poured so much into a life you thought was rock solid. I can still recall how normal everything felt just a few weeks before it all fell apart. We were planning a trip, discussing our kids' progress in college, and juggling our busy schedules. Sure, I'd been consumed with work, especially a trial that took up most of my attention, but Shelley had always been supportive and understanding of the demands of my job. That's why when I came home one afternoon to find her note, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Her note was hauntingly simple. "Joey, I'm leaving for a while. I don't know how long I'll be gone. None of this is your fault. I've met someone. Please don't try to reach me. I need to do this. With love, Shelley." It was a total shock to me. Just like that, my wife of 21 years was gone. Poof. I'm Joe Mason, and my wife is Michelle, Shelley for short. We've known each other since elementary school because our parents worked together. But we didn't start dating until college. We went to different schools growing up, but reconnected in college, and by senior year, we were living together. We got married the summer after we graduated. Shelley is a vibrant, energetic blonde of average height and build, with blue eyes. I'm also of average height and build, with brown hair and eyes. I run my own law firm, and Shelley works as a nurse manager at a local hospital. We're both 42, and we stay in shape by going to the gym, hiking, and playing volleyball. Shelley loves aerobic dance, while I take self-defense classes and hit the heavy bag. We have 2 kids in college, James 19 and Susan 18, a freshman. The day I got the note, a bright April afternoon, I called James right away and read it to him. "James, your mom left. She's gone," I said, my voice trembling. He paused. "What? What do you mean, gone?" "She left a note," I replied. "She's left me just like that." James was silent for a moment before speaking again. "I can't believe this. I'm shocked, Dad." "I'll keep you updated, son," I said, trying to stay calm. Then I called Susan. She wasn't as surprised when I told her. "Susan, did you know your mom was planning to leave?" I asked. She hesitated. "Not exactly, no, but I did notice something." "What do you mean, Susan? Who is this guy she met?" I asked, pressing for details. Susan sighed. "I saw her having lunch with a guy from work a few times. I asked her about it, and she said he was just a friend. His name is William Connor." "But you had suspicions, didn't you?" I asked. Susan sounded regretful. "I didn't think much of it, Dad. She seemed a little off when I asked, but I let it go. I should have told you. I'm sorry." "It's not your fault, Susan. I'll take care of it," I said, trying to comfort her. After making those calls, I went online to research William Connor. He's a doctor who recently left the hospital where Shelley works. According to his bio, he's 40, divorced, and a cardiologist, although he's been in administration for the past 2 years. I found an incident from 3 years ago where a patient died during surgery he was involved in. He's tall, stocky, and fair-haired. But when I tried to find his current job or address, I came up empty. I reached out to a friend who's skilled with computers to help track down Shelley and Connor. "Bill, I need your help," I said when he answered. "What's going on, Joe?" Bill asked. "Shelley's gone, and I think she's with a guy named William Connor. I need you to help me find them," I explained. "All right, I'll dig into it and let you know if I find anything," Bill assured me. Later, I checked our bank accounts. Shelley hadn't touched her checking account, but her direct deposit hadn't gone through this month, and she withdrew nearly all of our savings, over $200,000, from our joint Vanguard account. I called Bill again and gave him the account information to trace the transaction. "I'll get right on it," Bill said. I decided to visit Shelley's parents, Mark and Sally Benton, who live about 30 miles away. When I arrived, both of their cars were parked outside. Mark answered the door and led me into the kitchen, where Sally was seated at the table. "Hello, Sally," I greeted her. "What do you know that I don't?" Mark spoke first, sounding resigned. "We knew Shelley was heading down a risky path, Joe. She confided everything to Sally, but she didn't want to hurt you." Sally added, "We agreed not to say anything until she had a chance to talk to you herself." "She didn't give me any chance," I exclaimed. "She took all our savings too. Maybe I'll have her arrested if she doesn't return half of it soon. I'm not happy with her or her friend." "Joe, please don't use that kind of language," Sally said, trying to keep calm. Mark jumped in. "She believes he's her future husband." I stared at him, stunned. "Do you believe that too? Because I consider him a thief, at least of money." Sally sighed. "We met him once, about a month ago. She introduced him as a colleague, but it was obvious there was more going on." "You knew, and you didn't warn me?" I asked, my anger rising. "We thought she'd come to her senses and talk to you," Mark replied. "I'll find her in a few days," I said coldly. "And she's right, I will react badly." Just then, my phone rang. It was Bill. "Joe, I found them. Shelley and Connor took jobs at a hospital in Pittsburgh. They're renting an apartment near the hospital and have a joint checking account with some money in it," Bill explained. "But the $200,000 hasn't shown up yet. I suspect they moved the money offshore." "Can you track it if that's the case?" I asked. "It'll be tough, but I can try. It'll cost more, though," Bill warned. "Keep me posted," I said before hanging up. I looked at Sally and Mark, who were watching me jot down the details Bill had given me. Sally spoke. "When she wants to come back, will you take her back?" I stared at her. "Why would you even think she'd come back? It seems like she wants a clean break, no contact." Tears welled up in Sally's eyes. "I think she'll want to return, Joe." "If she came back now and apologized, maybe we could go to counseling," I said. "But the longer she stays with him, living as his wife, well, you get it." Sally started crying, and Mark comforted her. I said goodbye and left, heading back to my office. Just as I was about to walk in, Bill called again. He said Vanguard had delayed the $200,000 transfer due to concerns about potential fraud. He explained that they were now refusing to release the money, even though the account was joint. Apparently, there were some issues with the transaction. I told him what Vanguard had said when I called earlier. I called them back, insisting the withdrawal was illegal. They explained that the transfer was blocked because of multiple anomalies in the method used. I asked one of my colleagues to quickly file a TRO against Vanguard, as well as against Connor and Shelley. He spent about an hour on it, and then I sent it electronically. This should hold off the theft for a while. A TRO is a temporary restraining order, typically filed alongside a request for a permanent injunction. I called my family in Oregon, who were retired, to let them know what had happened. They were shocked and very sympathetic. Then I sat down and thought about what else I could do, and more importantly, what I wanted to do. I did a quick search and found out that infidelity isn't a crime in Pennsylvania, but in Virginia it's a misdemeanor. I filed that away in my mind. I decided to do what I often did when faced with difficult situations, call my mentor, Uncle Jed. Jed is my mom's older brother and lives nearby in D.C. He's a retired lawyer, although now he works as a lobbyist. To me, though, he's always been a source of wisdom, not so much in legal matters, but in life. I asked if I could come by, and we agreed on dinner. I'd bring some fancy pizza and beer to his place. While waiting, I called a private investigator I knew and asked him to find out how long Shelley had been involved with Connor. This might have been going on for a while. Who knows? I tried to think back. Was there anything about Shelley recently that should have raised red flags? I had just wrapped up a long and difficult trial that lasted 4 months. We won and were negotiating how much the settlement should be reduced. Maybe during those 6 months between preparing for and handling the trial, I hadn't paid enough attention to Shelley. We were still having sex, at least until about a month ago when it suddenly stopped. I should have noticed something earlier. There hadn't been any change in how she responded or how often. Busy or not, I always enjoyed being with her. This wasn't my first extended trial. After a few weeks, I settled back into a routine, and at home, I wasn't as distracted anymore. On the way to Jed's, I made a stop at the clinic and took a series of tests for physically transmitted diseases. Then I picked up the pizza and beer. When I arrived, Jed greeted me at the door, just like I remembered from when I was a kid. The house hadn't changed. His last wife left him about a year ago. He had been married to Ellen, a wonderful woman, for 40 years. But she passed away from pneumonia 5 years ago. Since then, he's had a few relationships, but none had lasted. Today, it was just him at home. "What brings such a busy lawyer to this quiet place?" he asked. I told him everything, showed him the note, and explained what I had done so far. "It's clear. This doesn't sound like her," he said. "I want you to sit here for a while and just think about your life with her, what it's been like. I'll get you something to drink and be back in a bit." He left, and I did what he suggested. I thought about all the good memories we had together. We laughed, raised our kids, had sex, and communicated well. We shared everything as a couple. As I reflected, I found myself crying silently. She had been the most important person in my life for over 20 years. Yes, we had children, but she was the one I loved and trusted above all. Tears flowed as I remembered our life together. And now she was gone. How could she do this to me? I sobbed quietly into my sleeve, overwhelmed by the memories. Jed came back with 2 drinks and a bottle of whiskey and let me cry it out. I poured the whiskey into our glasses. As I watched him down his drink, I did the same. It was a welcome distraction. He looked at me and said, "You're so damn smart." "Thanks. Do you want her back?" "I want my old life back, but that feels impossible. I'm not sure I want her back. She might do this again if I even survive it this time." "I think you need time to process everything. You might need help to do that. All I did was help you release some of the pain, but you need more help than I can offer. I'm not exactly a great role model since Ellen passed." "Well, you're still having sex," I said. "Yeah, but that's not enough when you've had everything," he replied. We talked for 2 hours about what our marriages had been like. We went back and forth, and I noticed tears in his eyes, too. Ellen wasn't coming back, but Shelley? Who knows? I was starting to realize I might not be able to be with her anymore. After that long conversation, I felt an overwhelming surge of righteous anger, so intense that I thought I might collapse. I stood up and stumbled outside to the backyard, where Jed had an old, heavy bag hanging from a tree. I began punching and kicking it, in a fit of rage, more furious than I had ever been. All my anger was directed at Shelley. I imagined punching her face, kicking her body. "You heartless, insensitive, evil witch," I screamed. Jed watched from the porch and later told me he almost called emergency. Just as he was about to dial, I kicked the pear tree, and one of the pears flew over the fence into the neighbor's yard. I collapsed on the ground, sobbing. Jed helped me back inside and did his best to calm me down. I was completely exhausted like a pile of wet noodles. Though I'm in good shape, I had gone way past my limit. After some time, I'm not sure how long, he laid me on the couch and covered me with an oriental robe. I slept through the night. In the morning, I woke up to the smell of bacon and coffee. I rolled off the couch and stood, still a bit shaky, but hunger got me moving. We had bacon, eggs, and toast. After breakfast, I took a shower. I threw off my old clothes and put on a tracksuit Jed lent me. I shaved, shampooed, and pulled myself together. My hands were swollen and red. I put antiseptic on them and bandaged them, something Shelley had taught me to do as a nurse. My whole body hurt, and I had a small cut above my right eye. I used a butterfly bandage and realized I looked like I'd been in a fight, and lost. About 24 hours had passed since I first read Shelley's note. Jed gave me the contact info for a marriage counselor he had seen, Mary Stevens. He said he believed she could help me get my life in order, even noting that marriage counseling didn't have to involve both people. I took the card, drove home, got dressed for work, and headed to the office. The staff noticed my rough appearance. Their eyebrows shot up. I called a team meeting. There are 12 of us, including 4 other lawyers besides me. I explained what had happened and told them I probably wouldn't be coming in much until things were resolved. We agreed on a replacement lawyer for my upcoming cases. Then I sat down in my office and miraculously got some work done. I stayed focused and had lunch at the office. At 5:30, I left and went home. Shelley had taken some clothes and personal items, but most of her belongings were still there. I went to Lowe's, bought boxes and tape, and started systematically packing up all her things. Clothes, books, photo albums, shoes, everything. I stored it all in the garage. Shelley's car wasn't there, so there was plenty of space. I called Bill and let him know Shelley had taken her car. Then I went through the house and gathered up all the photos of Shelley from every room. I threw them all away, frames, photo albums, everything. Afterward, I sat down and thought about everything that had happened. I microwaved some dinner and went to bed. Just as I was about to fall asleep, it occurred to me to check our home computer and her phone, which was still on the charger. I went through her email but found nothing helpful. Her phone, however, had calls from a number in Virginia, dating back about 6 weeks, up to today. There were also text messages to Connor, aka Bill, later Billy. The texts were about setting up lunch and meeting before work, nothing too incriminating. Then I finally went to sleep. On my day off, I went back to work. It had helped the day before, and it worked again. After lunch, the private investigator called. He said he was at a cafe where women from Shelley's department often ate. He just listened in. Unsurprisingly, the disappearance of their boss and the attractive doctor had become a hot topic of gossip. Even before they vanished, there had been a lot of speculation about them. One woman had seen them leaving a motel during the day, and another had spotted them kissing near a nearby restaurant. The staff was pretty convinced they were lovers. The investigator found rental records for motel rooms in the weeks leading up to Shelley's departure. She rented a room for half a day 3 times, paying in cash. He had copies of the receipts and car license numbers. Twice it was her car, once it wasn't. I decided I needed to check out Connor's finances. Why wasn't he covering his share? So I called Bill again. It took him about 2 hours to figure out that about 10 months before they left, Connor had been facing serious financial trouble. He had mortgage, car, and credit card debt. After his divorce, the hospital had been garnishing his wages for arrears, and he wasn't paying child support. It hit me that for Connor, this might all be about the money, specifically the $200,000. I felt sorry for Shelley for about 10 seconds before I punched a nearby office chair, knocking it over and sending it flying across the room. My assistant poked her head in to see what had caused the noise, and I had to apologize. I called and made an appointment with a marriage counselor. Then I walked down the hall to the family law firm and asked to see Mildred Hoover. Mildred is the best divorce lawyer around. She had time to see me and immediately took me to her office. I explained the situation to her. I learned that the TRO hearing was set for next Monday and that Shelley had been served at her job in Pittsburgh. I didn't need Mildred for that. My firm could handle it. But I asked her what to expect in the divorce. She gathered some financial data and spent a bit of time on her computer. She doesn't appear to be doing very well financially. Because of the prenup, your law firm is off the table. She'll get half the house and half the assets you accumulated during the marriage, which, I assume, is the bulk of your joint assets. She'll be comfortable enough, Let's see what happens at the TRO hearing, but be ready to provide documentation on the infidelity and everything else. That evening, I had a microwave pizza and went for a long run. Around 9:30, I called Susan. She picked up just as she was about to send me to voicemail. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" "I'm fine. Just wanted to know if you've heard from your mom." "Well, I have, but I promised her I wouldn't say much." "Damn it." "She says you're trying to get her and Connor in trouble. She's supposed to be in court, or at least have a lawyer there on Monday. She's upset." "What's happening, Dad?" "Money. Someone tried to pull it out of our joint investment account. I filed a suit to stop it so we can work things out. I'm not sure if your mom even knows about it." "All right, is she safe with this guy?" Susan sounded concerned. "I don't know. It's up to her, really. She can leave if she feels threatened. Why do you ask?" There was some yelling in the background, a man's voice. I couldn't make out what he said, but he sounded angry. "Mom said it's nothing to worry about. I hope she's right. Nothing I can do from here." We talked about her classes and a new friend she had made. Then we hung up. I had a busy weekend. The big day was Monday. TRO hearing in the morning and a meeting with the counselor in the afternoon. I spoke to James, who hadn't heard from his mother at all, and then I headed to the gym. While I was there, I ran into Shelley's close friend, Clara Barton, another nurse. She saw me and tried to slip out through the back door, but I caught her before she could leave. "I don't want to talk, Joe. It won't help anything," she said. "You knew she was cheating, Clara. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "She said you'd react badly, maybe even become cruel. I'm her friend, Joe, and I don't know you well enough to judge if she was telling the truth." "And what about Connor? Isn't he trouble? Because that's the vibe I'm getting." "Yes, he is trouble. I warned her about him, but she was in too deep. She liked the Zex, thought she was in love, and believed he was her future." "Yeah, I heard that from her mom. I wish she had just talked to me about it instead of sneaking off. I think she'll come back soon. He's not her future, and this could blow over if you're patient." "No, it won't. She made her choice, and she can't come crawling back to me." Clara shrugged and returned to the treadmill. She looked great in her tight spandex outfit. As she resumed her workout, I watched her openly. She noticed and looked back at me in the mirror, smiling. I smiled back. She increased the speed on the treadmill, which accentuated her figure, especially her curves. I blew her a kiss and left the gym, but I couldn't shake the memory of our exchange. It made me realize that I could soon be free, and there's nothing wrong with starting fresh. That conversation with Clara lifted my spirits. Just thinking about her made me excited. It had been a long time since I'd been engaged physically with anyone, especially since Shelley and I hadn't had sex. I was wearing loose gym shorts, and feeling a bit flustered, I headed to the leg press machine. I set the weight high and started doing reps, 3 sets of 12. Then I added more weight. I noticed Clara had stepped off the treadmill and was walking toward me. We made eye contact and she stood close, watching me lift. It wasn't easy, but I pushed through. After finishing the last set, I lowered the weight and lay there, breathing heavily, looking up at her. She noticed I was clearly excited. She glanced down and said, "I feel bad, but I'm willing to overlook it. Want to come shower at my place across the street?" "Deal. I'll grab my things and meet you at the entrance," I replied. "No need to grab anything. You can come back afterward," she said, smiling and licking her lips. "I hope you're not too tired." Clara was around 30, of average height, with a thick, curvy figure. She had brown hair, hazel eyes, and was attractive in the traditional sense. She'd been married, but was now divorced. She was, without a doubt, the perfect distraction for me. I got up and followed her out of the gym. There were only 2 other people there, a man and a woman, and they both smiled as we left. All 4 of us exchanged smiles. Clara led me across the street to an apartment building and up to the 2nd floor. The view as we climbed was quite a sight, with her swaying and giggling seductively. She opened the door and stepped aside, letting me enter first. I glanced around briefly, but before I could take it all in, she grabbed me from behind, spun me around, and pulled me toward her. She lifted my face, and I responded by kissing her deeply. It was one of the most passionate kisses I'd ever experienced. We finally broke apart, and she sighed. "I've always wanted you, but you were my boss's husband. Now you're mine. I'm all yours." I laughed, took a step back, and started undressing. Shirt, shoes, shorts, and underwear all gone. Clara removed her sports bra, revealing her perfect bosoms, and then kicked off her shoes before sliding out of her spandex shorts. Her body was stunning, smooth, toned, and curvy in all the right places. She pushed me into the bedroom, laying me on the bed, and leaned down on my chest with her elbows. I began giving her affection, and soon she gasped, reaching a strong climax. "Take me hard, Joe. Strong and long." We threw ourselves into it. She climaxed first, and I followed her shortly after, both of us reaching intense highs. Exhausted, I collapsed next to her. After a few minutes, she asked, "How soon can you recover?" "I can't say for sure," I replied, though it was the best sex of my life. It turned out the answer was about 60 seconds, as she started working to restore me. Once I was ready, round 2 began, but this time she took the lead. I didn't mind at all. We climaxed together again, and she collapsed on top of me. I passed out for a bit, and she woke me later. "Go grab your stuff and come back. You can shower here," she said. It was already dark. I got dressed, ran to get my things, and packed them quickly. On my way out, the woman who had been there earlier smiled at me. "Had a good time?" she asked. "Oh yeah, thanks for asking," I replied. When I returned, Clara had already showered. I took one too, then put on a fresh pair of sports shorts I had in my bag. That's all I wore. Clara, meanwhile, was in a terry robe, which I knew I'd be taking off later. "We'll need food and beer," she said. She pulled 2 bottles of light ale from the fridge and a frozen pizza from the freezer, placing it in the oven and setting the timer. For now, we drank the beer. "So, were you serious about not taking Shelley back?" she asked. "I might have been a little hasty when I said that, but now, with you maybe, this feels serious." "Well, if she did it, now you've done it too. Having Zex with you could be a pretty convincing argument for moving on. Anyway, why does everyone think she'll want to come back? She must have thought hard about leaving. Soon enough, she'll realize how foolish she was. Maybe she'll have the guts to ask me to take her back. But maybe not. She could be too ashamed. I'll tell you this, Joe. She's been with this guy for a long time. I don't think I could forgive that. Your relationship is probably ruined. I can't imagine her asking you to change your mind. Well, big guy, whatever happens, you know where to find me. I'll do my best to drive you crazy, I promise." I finished my beer just as the oven beeped, and Clara served the pizza. We ate it in 15 minutes, drank more beer, and then enjoyed each other again. It was incredible. I realized I was falling for her. We had Zex all night. In the morning, I woke up next to her, both of us unclothed. My movement woke her up, and she got out of bed to brush her teeth, handing me a spare toothbrush. After that, we took a shower together. I pressed her against the wall, and we had Zex standing up. I'd never experienced anything like the wild passion we shared in that shower. Later, we cooked and ate a big breakfast, still unclothed. Why bother getting dressed? After breakfast, we lounged on her sofa, digesting our food, and soon had Zex again, ending with our usual intense release. She said, "I'm not sure what to do with all this. I've always been drawn to you. And yesterday, when I saw my chance, I jumped on it, so to speak, like a tigress. I have to say, I never expected anything like this. It's incredible. We just had Zex, but I already want you again, right now." She laughed at the look on my face. "Don't worry. I know you might need a little time." Maybe. I wasn't sure how long it would take me. It felt like an experiment. 10 minutes? 20? We needed answers. She said, "I'm trying to make sense of all this." She looked down at me, noticing I was ready again. "You're like a machine. Can we talk after this next round?" "Yes." 20 minutes later, she went to the bathroom. "Maybe we should get dressed. Otherwise, we might die, or have a stroke or something." "Fine, but only for a little while." I threw on my gym shorts and a t-shirt. She slipped into a dress, but I knew exactly what was underneath, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. "Jesus Christ, what's going on here?" Clara asked, seriously. It seemed like she was having trouble processing everything that had happened. "I think we might be the most physically compatible people in the world," I said. This was my genuine belief. I'd been thinking about it while brushing my teeth. I'd read about Zex, talked about it with friends, even browsed Dan Savage's advice columns, but I'd never encountered anything like what was happening between me and Clara. It felt like we were in uncharted waters. How long could this last? And would we survive it? Clara smiled at my comment, but her concerns were valid. "We don't know the answers to those questions. There's only one way to find out. I think we should head to my place so I can change and check my email. If you sit a little farther from me in the car, maybe we'll make it there." She laughed, and I couldn't help but join in. We ended up rolling on the floor with laughter. Once we settled down, we decided to give it a try. Our fiery energy cooled slightly. We got dressed and headed to my house. As far as I knew, Clara had never been inside, and she started looking around while I managed to get a bit of work done. I went upstairs and changed into fresh shorts and a new shirt. It was Sunday, so I turned on the baseball game. I found out Clara was a huge fan. So was I. We watched for nearly an hour before I started getting affectionate. This time, we made our way upstairs to the master bedroom. I made love to her gently, taking our time, and we reached another mutual climax. It was incredible, something that rarely happened between Shelley and me. Clara looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "Joey, I've fallen in love with you. I just want to thank you for everything." Now she was crying, and I started crying too. Eventually, we dried our tears. I said, "I wonder how the game's going." We went back downstairs and watched the last 2 innings. She really knew her stuff, calling out when a player would steal a base or attempt a hit and run. She was fully invested in the game, and so was I. Afterward, I made us a meal, roasted chicken. We ate, drank some wine, and shared light touches, caressing each other. Looking into her eyes, I realized that I wanted her by my side for the long run. She said, "I'm in love with you, Joe, and I'll fight to keep it." "You don't need to fight. I'm all yours." We went back upstairs for another round of tender lovemaking. We kept going, even into the next morning, including during breakfast. I said, "It's time for me to head to court and therapy. Maybe I don't need therapy as much now, but I'll still go. If you're here when I get back, I'll cook dinner again. I'll be here, I'd say fully dressed, but more likely I'll be unclothed." We laughed. Then I kissed her and took her home. I stood in court with a lawyer from my firm when Connor and Shelley arrived with their attorney. Vanguard's lawyer was also present. Judge Colson took his place on the bench. Shelley didn't look at me, and Connor glanced my way briefly before turning away. Vanguard's lawyer began by explaining why the money transfer had been blocked. The transfer request came from an unrecognized computer at 3 a.m., and the email linked to this request also came from this unfamiliar device. The computer had never been used for the account before, and the account where the money was supposed to go didn't belong to either Shelley or me. The firm's system flagged the transaction, and the transfer was blocked until both account holders were notified. The lawyer emphasized that Vanguard wanted the TRO to avoid any liability over the dispute. My lawyer argued that the money was joint property and had been moved without my knowledge or consent, and now against my objection. He pointed out that Shelley left me unexpectedly, quit her job, relocated to Pittsburgh, and moved in with William Connor. Shelley's lawyer countered, stating that Shelley had as much right to withdraw funds from the account as I did, and the money should be transferred where she had intended. The judge asked the Vanguard lawyer, "Where was the money supposed to go?" "To a local bank account in the name of William Connor." "Have you identified whose computer was used for the transfer attempt?" "No, that's beyond our current capabilities," the lawyer responded. The judge then said, "I'd like Mrs. Mason to take the oath, please." Shelley seemed to shrink into herself as Connor grabbed her hand. The clerk asked her to raise her right hand, which she did hesitantly. When asked if she swore to tell the truth, Shelley answered, "Yes." "Mrs. Mason, are you married to Joseph Mason?" "Yes." "Do you jointly own an account with him at Vanguard?" "Yes," she replied. "Did you attempt to withdraw $200,000 from this account last week?" No." Shelley looked around nervously, and Connor let go of her hand and stepped aside. "Did you give anyone permission to withdraw that money?" "Not exactly." "Explain, please," the judge instructed. "Bill, Mr. Connor asked to borrow $20,000 to pay off some overdue debts." I reluctantly agreed. He asked for my password because my computer wasn't working after we moved. I gave him the password, and he used his computer. I used it to check my email while he was on it for a few minutes, then he closed it. I didn't know anything about the $200,000. "When did you learn about the amount?" "When I got the written notification." The judge looked at Connor and made a note. "Mr. Connor, could you state your name and address, please?" "I'm not here to be a part of this," Connor responded. "I just came to support Michelle." "Please comply," the judge said firmly. Connor reluctantly gave his name and address. I already knew this information. The judge then turned to my lawyer and asked, "Is Mr. Mason planning to file for divorce?" "Yes, Your Honor. The paperwork has been prepared and will be filed this week." The judge ordered Vanguard to freeze the account until a family law court could review the assets. He told my lawyer that the divorce papers had to be filed by the end of the day tomorrow, or he would reconsider the freeze order. I saw Shelley slump into a chair at the table, her head in her hands. Connor hurried out of the courtroom. Shelley sat there silently, completely withdrawn. The courtroom was almost empty, just the two of us left. The bailiff motioned for us to leave so he could lock the doors. I guided Shelley into the corridor. Connor was nowhere to be found, and only a few people passed by. "You came here with that idiot?" I asked, staring at her. "Yes," she mumbled, barely able to meet my eyes. "I think you should take the bus back to your new life." Joey, I'm sorry this happened, she said, tears welling up. I thought he was mine, my betrothed. That's what I told my family. Looks like I was wrong. I feel like such a fool. You have no idea how deeply you hurt me by ending a long marriage with a short note. Joey, our marriage isn't over. I see that now. I was stupid. I want to come back and be your wife again. Tears streamed down her face. Sorry, Shelley, it's too late. You've been sleeping with that idiot for months behind my back. You left without even talking to me. You lived with him like he was your husband. You have to face the consequences. Can't we go somewhere more private? What about the kids? She pleaded. They're unhappy with you and you know it. Do you have any real reason for throwing me away like a used napkin? No. If you had asked me earlier, I would have told you I thought he was my soulmate. I thought a clean break would be easier for you. But now I can't explain why I was so foolish, she said, crying even harder. I hated seeing her like that, but I kept my distance. I was done with her, at least as my wife. There's a limit to everything. Yes, I said quietly. And Clara, she's my soulmate. At the very least, she's the best sexual partner I've ever had. And I like her beyond that. It feels real to me. I asked Shelley what she planned to do next. I have a job in Pittsburgh. I have a shift tomorrow. I need to pay rent. I signed a year lease. I'll kick Bill out and see what happens. Maybe after some time you'll miss me. Let me know if you do. Sure, I said. I'll probably miss you. But I still want to understand what went wrong. I'm shocked and confused. I thought things were fine between us. I didn't see this coming. When I can figure it out, I'll let you know, she said, hugging me before she left. I didn't know what to think. A deep sadness settled over me, and I cried openly after she left. But underneath the sadness, there was a knot of anger twisting inside me. I decided I needed to see a therapist, so I went to my appointment that afternoon after grabbing lunch at Subway, a hot tuna sandwich with melted cheese. Mary Stevens, the marriage counselor, made it clear she wasn't a therapist. Her focus was on troubled marriages and their outcomes, if necessary. At first glance, she looked like a typical gray-haired grandmother. But as she crossed the room to shake my hand, she moved with an athletic grace, and her smile was warm and genuine. I liked her immediately. What brings you here, Mr. Mason? Please call me Joe. My wife suddenly left me. She wrote a short note and moved to Pittsburgh with her new man. Before that, she had been sleeping with him for about a month. I see. And how did you respond? I explained that at first I was completely overwhelmed. Then I talked about my session with Jed and the time spent punching the heavy bag. I said I was heartbroken and then I got angry. Now, I felt like I was experiencing both emotions at the same time. I think you've quickly gone through several stages that often occur when marriages end. Depression, sadness, and anger, Mary Stevens said. These feelings can alternate for quite a while. How are you feeling now? I'm confused, to be honest. I was at the gym, lifting weights to vent my anger, I guess. There was a nurse there, Clara Barton, someone I knew through Shelley, believe it or not. I cornered her and asked what Shelley had been up to at work with that doctor. She didn't want to tell me at first, but eventually, she did. Then I noticed her in spandex on the treadmill. We made eye contact through the mirror, and the next thing I knew, we were in her apartment across the street, having sex. And I've never done anything like this before. We didn't leave each other's side all night. And then the next day. It's been several days now, and I barely made it to today's court hearing. Mary looked surprised at first, but then smiled, which I'd already mentioned how much I liked. So you're clearly attracted to Clara Barton, the nurse? She asked, nearly laughing. There was a glimmer in her eyes. How did she end up with a name like Barton? It's a man's name, and she became a nurse. I felt a little embarrassed and said, I didn't ask her about it. We haven't done much talking so far. I'm tempted to ask for details, but no, that wouldn't be appropriate, she said, tilting her head slightly. We were sitting on opposite sides of the table, and she crossed her legs, still smiling. I felt myself starting to react. She didn't seem at all like the grandmotherly figure I had initially perceived. Something felt off, so I said, It seems like you're trying to show me something, maybe to reflect what I've been experiencing. I'm not sure how else to explain it. Mary looked at me, a bit surprised, but impressed. That's insightful, especially for a man. You caught on quickly. I must be losing my touch. Oh no, you've definitely had the intended effect, I replied, crossing my legs and turning slightly away from her. The point I was trying to make, she said, is that you're especially vulnerable right now, physically speaking. You could easily become prey to women who see an opportunity. I'm not saying Clara's feelings aren't sincere, and I'm not doubting yours, even if they seem a bit one-dimensional. but I think it's important for you to get to know her better when you two have time to actually talk. I'm sure we'll find the time, I said. She laughed. You're quick, Joe. I understand you. Clara said she always found you attractive, but you were forbidden fruit. Well, Joe, Mary continued, I don't want to spoil our professional relationship, and I can't. But what you've described goes beyond typical casual sex. It's possible this is something real, as there are rare cases of extreme sexual compatibility, maybe more common than we think. But for now, I want to help you separate this new relationship with Clara from your marriage. Why? Isn't a new relationship part of moving on? Yes, it is. But I want to focus on understanding your marriage first because that will influence how you approach future relationships. Got it, I said. Well, as far as I can tell, you had a good, solid marriage, I began. I loved her. I thought she loved me. We raised our kids together and didn't argue often. I'm a trial lawyer, so I worked hard, but I always made time for our relationship, especially for Zex. Before she left, I had just finished a long trial. We went about a month without Zex. Apparently she was getting it elsewhere, and I didn't even notice. That's on me. So Shelley's youngest, her daughter, went off to college. You were busy, and maybe she felt old. That could have been a factor, Mary suggested. Maybe, but she should have talked to me about it. Instead, she decided to run off and marry some complete idiot, a thief no less. What would you have done if she had told you she felt lost, or was tempted, or worse, that she had already given in to temptation? If she felt lost or tempted, I would have helped. Maybe we would have come to you, but if she'd already cheated, then it's too late. That's a line I don't cross. Cheating means it's over. I kept my promises until she walked out. That's a pretty hard stance. What if it had been a one-night mistake while she was drunk? Mary asked. Same thing. Well, maybe not. It depends on what she did while drunk. But these are all hypotheticals. In reality, she did what she did, and it's unacceptable. All right. I'd like to continue this next week, Mary said. Of course. You're an interesting woman. Completely unexpected. I look forward to seeing you again as long as you're not too tired, I replied, trying to lighten the mood. She smiled, and we scheduled our next session. Since it was already 4 p.m., I decided to head home. When I arrived, Clara was sitting on the porch, reading. We didn't say much, just exchanged greetings, before we spent 90 minutes in bed together. Afterward, we cooked dinner. Fried potatoes, spring onions, minced lamb, and spices. The hot spices really brought out the flavor. While cooking and eating, Clara wore shorts but no top. I tried not to focus on her bare bosoms. Fine, just a second, Clara said, grabbing a t-shirt and putting it on. Thank you. Maybe we can talk now that we're full and dressed. Maybe, she replied. I think we need to talk about something important. About what? I saw a psychotherapist today after the court hearing. I told her about what we've been experiencing and how intense it's been. She called it sexual hypercompatibility, meaning we might be physically obsessed with each other. She said it could be part of my recovery, but she wasn't convinced because sex during recovery doesn't usually look like this. I've wondered the same thing, how we can keep going like this. I'm sure of how I feel, but if you took off your shorts, I'd be on my knees in no time. It's strange, I admitted. Clara smiled, but her tone was serious. I need to make a decision about Shelley, the divorce, all of this. She went back to Pittsburgh, but not to that guy. She said she had work and rent to deal with, which was after I told her we were done. Sounds like she might be trying to find something in Pittsburgh. I don't know. All I can say is, if what we have is real, I'm not giving it up. But it hasn't been that long since I thought I was in a happy marriage. I'm confused. Before making any permanent decisions, I want to get to know you in a non-biblical way, I said, trying to express my uncertainty. Sounds like a plan, Clara responded. What would you like to know? Clara opened up about her suburban upbringing, college, and past relationships. After graduating, she broke up with her college boyfriend. She became a nurse, got a job here, and married a doctor, a gynecologist. I was happy with our life, but he cheated on me, she said. He had an affair with a woman nearby and wasn't discreet. I found out, confronted him, and he apologized. I tried to save the marriage, but it was a mistake. A year later, he cheated again. After our divorce, I got a good settlement. He moved his practice to New York, and I haven't seen him since. That was 5 years ago. I've had a few short-term relationships since then. Last year, I had a friend with benefits until he moved to Thailand. Are you thinking about going abroad? I asked. No, she replied. When we met at the gym, how long had it been since your last relationship? I asked. Almost a month, and it wasn't great. I do have a vibrator, though. she added with a smile. Well, now you have me, I said, leaning in to kiss her. I didn't want to interrupt the conversation, but it ended naturally. Later in bed, we continued. She asked about my life, and I gave her a pretty complete overview. She already knew a lot about the recent years, so I focused on earlier events. Eventually, we fell asleep. I guess our bodies needed the rest. Over the next few days, our intense physical relationship continued, though at a slightly slower pace. I saw Mary Stevens again. She asked about my new relationship, and I told her that while the sex was still great, it wasn't as constant as before. I also mentioned that Clara loved baseball and knew a lot about it. I shared how we'd been talking about our pasts and that I thought it would take a long time to truly get to know Clara, but I was eager to try. We then delved deeper into my marriage. Mary mentioned that I would need time to process my emotional response to everything that had happened. She asked about my feelings toward Dr. Connor, and I realized I hadn't given him much thought. But now my feelings could be summed up in 3 words: drawn and quartered. Mary smiled. I've always liked that phrase, but it's so barbaric. That's exactly how I feel. As a concept, drawn and quartered has a certain appeal, I said. I believe it was originally done to a living person. Oh, yes. Now I'm curious how you know so much about it, she replied with a grin. We're not talking about me. I'm just an ordinary person with emotions, I said, trying to steer the conversation back. Still smiling, she added, You know, if it weren't for Clara, I might have asked you out on a date. I understand what you were doing, but it was a very effective demonstration. Just so you know, I smiled. I think you already did. Yes, I've always had that talent. If you weren't a patient, I could use it on you, but now it's off limits, she teased. We finished the session, and I scheduled another appointment in 2 weeks. I also asked Shelley to file for divorce. She had a lawyer, and since there were no minor children involved, the divorce went smoothly. It took about 8 months. Shelley stayed in Pittsburgh, and we occasionally talked on the phone. She told me she was dating, and I told her about Clara. Shelley sighed when I brought her up. That girl has always wanted you, Shelley said. I could see it. I'm such an idiot. There was a bitterness in her voice. As for Clara, she moved into my house, and I bought out Shelley's share. Our sexual compatibility settled into a more normal rhythm. I told Clara I loved her and wanted our relationship to continue, but I wasn't interested in getting married again. I'd been burned once. Clara didn't have children, but wanted at least one. We discussed it. She was 37, and I approached the topic with a mix of hesitation and excitement. One day, Clara told me she had stopped taking birth control. She knew I had some internal conflict about it, but after she stopped, she practically made love to me until I gave in. I ended up feeling happier than ever. When she announced she was pregnant, I already knew before she said a word. Her pregnancy made our bed life even more thrilling for both of us. A few days after Clara and I tied the knot in the office of a judge I knew well, our daughter Linda was born. Both of our parents, my kids, everyone was there. Shelley remarried too, this time to a pediatrician from Pittsburgh whom she met at a convention in Dallas. I hope she's happy. She made a huge mistake, and I still hold some blame, but everything worked out so well for me that it's hard to hold on to much resentment. Maybe just a little. As for Connor, I didn't have to do anything. He self-destructed. From what I hear, he went bankrupt, lost his medical license, and now works at a gas station in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. Clara and I now have 2 kids, Linda and Stephen, named after her father, who was a great man. Our compatibility never faded, and I believe it never will.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
They say everything works out for the best, and I suppose that's true for me too, but it sure was rough getting here. My name is Evan Clark. I'm a pretty average guy in many ways, 5 feet 6 inches, 155 pounds, with dark brown hair and blue eyes. I'm more of an observer at parties than the life of the party. I never quite know who to talk to or what to say to keep people entertained. I was in the Army when I met Rachel. I had a rare weekend pass, one of my last few weekends at footbending, which I jokingly called the summer resort for boys. The real nickname was Benning School for Boys, better known as Officer Candidate School, OCS. If you've ever seen An Officer and a Gentleman, it was basically the Army's version of that. But I'm getting off track. A couple of buddies and I decided to escape Columbus for the weekend and check out Atlanta. Naturally, as red-blooded soon-to-be lieutenants, we headed straight for Buckhead. It took us a while to find it since none of us knew the city, but when we did, we wasted no time enjoying the sights and sounds of the local scene. We started the night at the ESPN zone, grabbing a couple of beers and competing in the sports arcade games for about an hour. It was hard to focus because we kept pointing out one girl after another, but that was the whole point of being there, right? We didn't really expect to get anywhere with the girls, especially with our freshly shaved heads. But luck was on our side. Just after leaving the ESPN zone, Robert and I literally bumped into two very attractive women on the sidewalk. We were busy arguing about the last round of the quarterback game when we collided with them. Robert, being 6 feet 3 inches, didn't need to be as studly as me to make an impression. The two women were just as distracted by their conversation. Janice was about 5 feet 4 inches and probably around 120 pounds, with platinum blonde hair, blue eyes, and a sweet smile. But Rachel had dark auburn hair, stood about 5 feet 6 inches, and weighed maybe 130 pounds. What really got me were her green eyes and her amazing legs. God, I love summer. Robert and I opted to insult them for not paying attention to where they were going as our approach. It was a risky move, but again, luck was on our side, since they both laughed and gave it right back to us. We stood on the sidewalk and talked and laughed for about 45 minutes before someone finally suggested that we find a place to sit down and have a beer. It turns out that both Janice and Rachel cut hair at one of local Sports Clips franchises, so they noticed our buzz cuts, and that started us on the great times to be had in the U.S. Army and in OCS in particular. They teased us about our need to let them cut it next time, so it wouldn't get ruined and force us into cutting it all off. To make a long story a little bit shorter, Robert and Janice continued to see one another when they could, as did Rachel and I. Rachel was everything. Or at least realistically everything I could have ever wanted in a girlfriend. She was gorgeous, smart, attentive, and fun. She seemed to enjoy sex, though she was a little reserved about what she liked to do. Oh, well, there are more important things in life, right? And I wasn't being denied. She didn't seem to have a problem with the time we had to spend in the field and always seemed glad to see me when we got back in. After OCS, I stayed at Footbending for Infantry Officers Basic Course, or IOBC as we called it, and spent even more time in the field along with a lot of very painful time in Building 4. Building Snore, did I say that? Was the building in which all the classroom instruction took place, and it was very hard to stay awake as very dry instructors of the captain and sergeant first class ilk droned on incessantly. However, I digressed again. As IOBC started to wind down, Rachel and I obviously had to make a decision about our relationship. I had grown to love her, and I thought she probably felt the same way, though we had never exchanged that sentiment. I decided to take her someplace nice for dinner over the weekend and tell her how I felt and try to see if we had a future together. We went to dinner at Nick's Fish Market in Atlanta, and yes, making that drive from Columbus constantly was beating me down. The food was fantastic, and the service was impeccable. We ordered dessert, and I finally got up the nerve to ask Rachel about how she felt. Rachel, we've been seeing one another for a few months now, and it has been great. As you know, I'm going to be transferred soon to Fort Riley, Kansas, so I guess I'd like to find out where we stand with one another. I have grown to love you, and would love it if you would consider going with me. I know the middle of nowhere Kansas can't really compete with Atlanta, but I'm hoping if you feel the same for me, or if you could get there, the location won't matter as much. Oh, Evan. Yes, I love you. As for going with you to Fort Riley, I'd like nothing better, and maybe you've already implied as much and I just don't want to make too many assumptions. But, do you see us as eventually getting married? I don't want to put any pressure on you or anything, but I really need to know if you feel like we could be headed there before I uproot my wild life to move with you. Of course that was reasonable. Rachel had grown up in Atlanta. All her friends and family were here. When I professed my love, I was by default saying that I assumed we'd get married sooner or later if she felt the same way. I guess not everyone thinks that way, though. Of course, honey. I'm so sorry not to have clarified that better. I have never told any woman before that I loved them. I certainly assume that we're headed for marriage if you feel the same way. Then, it's settled. This is so exciting. I can't wait to tell Janice. Needless to say, we had a great night of sex that night. A couple of months later, we had moved to Manhattan, Kansas, and I was hip-deep involved in the training cycle since our battalion was going to deploy to the National Training Center, NTC, for our biggest and most important combat exercises and evaluations soon. Rachel had no problem, of course, finding a job since you can find a Sports Clips, Great Clips, or something similar hiring almost anywhere. We found a nice apartment and Rachel did a great job of making it into a home for us with very little help from me. I got along great with Captain Reynolds, my company commander, and even more importantly, with my platoon sergeant, Sergeant First Class Donovan. Sergeant Donovan's deeply tanned-lined facial features, sitting on 5 feet 11 inches of muscle and gnarly manner, demanded respect. For those that may not know, the more experienced non-commissioned officers pride themselves on being the backbone of the Army. Not only are they responsible for leading soldiers and fire teams and squads, but the more senior NCOs are responsible for helping the officers lead platoons, companies, and above, as well as training young new officers. Bad NCOs can make your life miserable. Good ones are worth their weight in gold. As I have already inferred, I had a good one as my second in charge and my mentor. The only real challenge I had in acclimating was with the company's supply sergeant. Sergeant Sullivan was a huge guy at 6 feet 4 inches and a weight that was proportionate. He was always in the gym and had the arms, back, and chest to show it. He was all about his upper body, though. He did nothing to develop his legs, and he never did any cardiovascular work. He was also one of those guys that always seemed to have a profile, so he couldn't run for PT. When someone in the Army is sick or hurt, or if they want to get out of something, they are required to show up for morning formation like everyone else, but then are allowed to go to sick call. At sick call, they wait for their chance to see the battalion PA and be treated. There are those, unfortunately, who will work the system to avoid having to run or do other kinds of training they don't like. Sergeant Sullivan only liked to exert himself to build his upper body, so he was often busy running profiles, which allowed him not to participate in any training involving running. He also often found a way to stay out of the field training exercises. I guess I didn't hide my opinion of Sergeant Sullivan very well, and, as a result, he made life tough on me whenever he could, which, because he held the role of supply sergeant, was often. Whenever we needed almost anything, we had to work with him to get it. If nothing else, Sergeant Sullivan would always refer to me as LT. That was how enlisted soldiers, and particularly NCOs with little respect for officers and or military courtesy, would address lieutenants in order to avoid calling them sir, or at least lieutenant. There were some, in fairness, who used that terminology and didn't mean it as discourteous, but Sergeant Sullivan wasn't among that group. Rachel and I had been at Fort Riley about 2 months when I decided that it was obvious we would and should get married. It was easy, since we had pretty much decided before moving here. I did try to make the official proposal as romantic as possible by taking her to the lake for a picnic one weekend afternoon in the fall. It was a great day, and we made love right there on the picnic blanket. It didn't take much to plan a wedding for a couple of reasons. Our training calendar wouldn't allow us to get married in Atlanta anytime soon. Rachel wanted to get married as quickly as possible, which pleased me. Obviously, some of the other lieutenants in my battalion, along with Sergeant First Class Reynolds, comprised my wedding party, and there was no need for tuxes since we all wore our blues. Rachel had Janice come from Atlanta to be her maid of honor, but some of the friends she had made at work and the family support groups served as her wedding party. We got married in late October on a beautiful fall Saturday and spent a wonderful and relaxing weekend in Crown Center in downtown Kansas City, which was a couple of hours' drive away. I had to be back for the company lanes training exercise on Monday morning, so it was a short honeymoon with promises to one another to take a real one after our battalion's NTC rotation in February. Married life wasn't a lot different since we had already been living together. I have always been pretty laid back in relationships and was no different in my marriage. Most things just aren't that big a deal to me, and I was happy to let Rachel make decisions on decorating, social calendar, etc. She seemed to enjoy doing it, so things were great. Our sex life predictably picked up to a frenzy for a few weeks, but then started to drop off to something less than it had been prior to getting married. Additionally, Rachel really didn't initiate anymore, which was a change because she used to initiate about most of the time. Thinking back, that was about the time that Rachel started to treat me in a subtly different manner. I was, and always had been, fine with her taking the initiative on many things in our relationship, but she started to treat me with what I can only describe as a lack of respect. Those couple of nuances were lost on me at the time because I was working so hard to make a good impression on the LTC. Lieutenant Colonel Ryan was the battalion commander as well as my senior rater, so his opinion of my work would significantly impact my career. It was during our Table 8 gunnery qualifications in early January that I found out for sure what should have been obvious to me for at least the last month or so. We ran out of kerosene for the heating stoves in the tent we used for our company CP, command post. I'll give you 3 guesses who should have made sure we had plenty of kerosene. But then you wouldn't need them, would you? Of course, the stellar NCO in question wasn't in the field with us. He was on profile, and therefore was in the rear detachment group. CPT Reynolds asked me to go to the rear and get some kerosene. This was kind of a mixed bag because I could stop in at my platoon CP in the rear and give Rachel a quick call to tell her I loved her, but it was also a gopher assignment, so that part really sucked. In fairness, my platoon had just fired, So I was the logical choice to go, and the CPT certainly did not intend it as an indictment of my value to the unit in the field. It took about 30 minutes to get to the rear and another 10 for my driver, Private First Class Johnson, and I to find the kerosene, but it was locked up in the company supply area. It should have been, so that was no big deal. I told Johnson to go and find Sergeant Sullivan, who should have been in the company area, but was not, and I went to my platoon CP in the barracks building next door. I heard voices coming from my CP when I got almost to the door. There shouldn't have been anyone in there, so I quietly walked up close to the door and heard the voices of both Sergeant Sullivan and my ever-adoring wife, Rachel. Rachel had never been so vocal when she and I made love, but then I guess they weren't making love. They were having sex. I listened long enough to hear some of what they were saying. It was the definition of cliché. Both Sergeant Sullivan and Rachel were belittling me, and both were singing the praises of his massive tool. For 10 minutes I stood there and listened. I was hurt, of course, but more than that, I was embarrassed and I was furious. I made a couple of very quick decisions after that few minutes. First, and probably needless to say, my short-tenured marriage was over. Second, I wasn't going to allow that to adversely impact my career. At least not based on a decision made in haste, or when I was this angry. They couldn't be in there much longer, and I definitely wanted to wait to let them both know they had been found out in my own time and way. I went back downstairs and found Johnson waiting for me by the Hummer. He told me that he hadn't found Sergeant Sullivan. I decided to have a little fun at that point. I told Johnson that I needed a field manual for my desk and gave him the key to the platoon CP. I told him I'd go look in the battalion area for Sergeant Sullivan. He was back in about 10 minutes with a very nervous-looking Sergeant Sullivan. "Sir, Sergeant Sullivan was in our CP. He said that he thought he might find some acetate there. In the Army, acetate is often used as overlays on maps. Did you find what you needed, Sergeant?" "No, sir. I'll see if 3rd Platoon has any in their CP. The Sergeant Major asked me if we had any." Interesting. He had never called me sir before. It was always LT, unless the commander happened to be around. Then it was Lieutenant. "Well, before you do that, help Johnson get some kerosene loaded up in the Hummer. Let's make it enough to last the rest of the week this time. Okay?" "Yes, sir." Twice in 5 minutes. 10 minutes later, Johnson and I were on our way back to the Multi-Purpose Range Complex, MPRC. Johnson never mentioned my wife having been in the CP, or even having seen her. I wondered if she happened to get out, hide, or if I was the only one that didn't know about this. I thought about what to do the rest of the week. I hope I did well with my work responsibilities. If anyone thought otherwise, they didn't comment. I came to a couple of conclusions. I would ask for a transfer out of the battalion. I thought the battalion and brigade commanders would probably approve it under the circumstances. Military wives cheat on occasion, of course, but not usually with someone from within the unit, and very seldom with someone of lower rank. I would divorce Rachel, of course. I didn't want to miss the NTC rotation coming up, though. I talked to all those I needed to when we got back from gunnery, obviously using the proper chain of command. I was gratified that they were more than willing to do what I asked. Simply put, to transfer me to another battalion, but not until after NTC, and not to say anything to anyone until the time was right. For all I know, Sergeant Sullivan and Rachel continued to see one another and have sex with one another every chance they got. I was somewhat surprised and very pleased that after the initial shock, I continued to feel anger to some extent, but very little hurt. If she would betray me that way, she really didn't matter to me at all. It was interesting how her demeanor continued to change at home. She treated me almost with disdain, and we obviously didn't have sex anymore. I don't know what I'd do if she asked for it. I certainly wouldn't have it, but I didn't have to worry about that because she was clearly not interested, which was fine with me. Our NTC rotation was very successful. The OPFOR, opposing force, kicked our butts in every fight as they always do, but we learned a lot, and the OCs, evaluators, told us that we performed much better than almost any other battalion. I was awarded a coin by the OCs as a result of the performance of my platoon in a particular mission, and I was very gratified because no other lieutenant got one. My platoon celebrated in a very robust manner when I told them about it. Of course, even though it was awarded to me, it was really a group effort and I told them so. I got CPT Reynolds to let us take a couple of hours off from vehicle recovery, and we walked to the bowling center and had a great time drinking beers and bowling even if we were in our BDUs. I won't lie. I was kind of fun to have the MP serve Rachel with divorce papers when I got back, and to see Sergeant Sullivan served with a field grade Article 15, which effectively started his career in a slow death track. Rachel was, for some reason, very surprised and mad. She denied her affair initially, but when I pointed out to her that it was not going to do her any good to be upset about it or lie about it, she softened considerably. I explained, first, that it wasn't going to make a difference, and that she was apparently fuming simply because she was mad and embarrassed at having been caught. I was past the initial hurt, and my anger had subsided at least a little bit by this time. I was apathetic about her thoughts and feelings on the matter. Second, I reminded her that Sergeant Sullivan was single and a divorce for her meant that she could be with him. I had a feeling that she wouldn't be as excited by that prospect in the long term as she would be in the short term. Anyone that would approach his career in the manner that Sergeant Sullivan did was highly suspect relationship material in my opinion. Obviously, the same is true of any soldier who would screw another soldier's wife. But as I previously indicated, I didn't really care. It was interesting that she seemed to take my comments to heart and show only what I assume she considered to be the minimum acceptable level of contrition while seeming to make plans for her new future at the same time. I transferred to another battalion and was lucky enough to land with a great group of soldiers with whom I could work. 6 years later, I was coming out of a nice restaurant in Raleigh, North Carolina. My beautiful wife, Ivy, and I had just celebrated our second anniversary and found out that we were expecting our first child. Yes, I had met Ivy a couple of years after my divorce in Wiesbaden, Germany. She is very petite at 5 feet 1 inch with raven-colored hair, blue eyes, and an incredible body. She was and is everything a man could hope for in a wife. Most importantly, loyal. We had come up from Fayetteville for the evening and had since decided to spend the night in a nice hotel, since we were on another of those great weekends where the division commander turns every 3-day weekend into a 4-day weekend. Ivy and I, being fans of Starbucks, decided to stop and have a latte. It was a beautiful evening, so we decided to sit outside. It was next to a bar, but the noise wasn't that bad and we were enjoying our lattes and each other's company when I heard a familiar voice behind me. I turned around and who do you think I saw but Sergeant Sullivan? Well, he was actually Private First Class Sullivan when he was transferred to Foot Bragg from what I had heard. He and his lovely wife, Rachel, were having a discussion of sorts. Sullivan appeared to be the bouncer at the bar next door to us, and Rachel was standing on the sidewalk next to a beat-up car that was still running and the door was open. I couldn't tell what it was about, but Ivy could tell I was interested. So I told her who the couple was and her eyes and mouth got wide. It was then that Sullivan and Rachel seemed to simultaneously notice us. Rachel's eyes lit up and Sullivan smiled, but it was one of those that you knew wasn't friendly. They both walked our direction. Sullivan was the first to speak. Well, if it isn't the chicken. How are you, LT, or should I say Evan? Since I'm not in the Army anymore, there is no reason to pretend to have any respect for someone that obviously can't keep his woman satisfied. Stop it, Lenny, said Rachel. Lenny, as his name apparently was, just pushed her aside and honed right in on Ivy. Well, little lady, would you like to see what a real man is like? Lenny addressed her directly. Obviously, this infuriated me, but I still tried not to make a scene and stayed seated. Evan is more man than you'll ever be and as much as I'll ever need. I don't want to be rude, but clearly there is nothing for any of us to discuss, so maybe the two of you should go ahead with whatever it was you were doing, responded Ivy. That's my girl, I thought to myself. That should give us one final chance of getting out of this without making a scene, but that was wishful thinking. Lenny moved around toward Ivy, and I had had enough. I pushed my chair back and punched him in the stomach as he swung but missed me. My quick punch both surprised him and knocked the wind out of him. I shouted over my shoulder for Ivy to get to the car, and she did so. With her on the way from the scene and Lenny starting to recover, I unleashed several punches in combination on him. He was as big as ever, but much too slow to be able to effectively counter. Finally, he fell in a heap on the sidewalk. Wow, said Rachel. What? I never knew you had that in you. I wish I had known before. Oh well, so your stud isn't in the Army anymore, huh? No. She hung her head and then started to break down. He got chaptered out shortly after we got to Foot Bragg. I'm so sorry, Evan. Can you ever forgive me? Why didn't you fight for me the way you just did for that woman? I thought you were a chicken. Why? Because I let you make a lot of decorating decisions and treated you kindly? Rachel, I did that because I saw you enjoy doing it, and it just wasn't that important to me. Let me guess, Sullivan. Sorry, I'll always think of him as Sullivan. Helped you with your thinking that I was a chicken? Evan, I can see you're with someone now. I have to be honest and say that my life has been pretty miserable since you divorced me. I just wish I had seen what I had when I had it. At the time, I just found the sex with Lenny more exciting than I did with you. I let that cloud my mind and forget two pretty important things. One of those being that comparing new and illicit sex to sex with someone with whom I've been with for a period of time is not a fair comparison because it's always going to seem more exciting at first. Second, that sex is just one aspect of a relationship, and learned the hard way that it's no more important than the other facets of making a relationship great. You always treated me amazingly well. In a way, that contributed to all this because I, consciously or subconsciously, thought that's how I'd be treated in any relationship. I hadn't let myself get close enough to anyone before to know how great I had it with you. I don't suppose that, if I left Lenny. The start of her question hung in the air for a moment before I could figure a way to answer. I felt sorry for her and wanted to hurt her at the same time if that's possible. Rachel, I have to be honest with you. Part of me is very glad you haven't been happy. You see, I never told you, but I heard you and Lenny screwing in my platoon CP when you thought I was in the field several years ago. I heard the things you said to one another and could tell you relished in doing things with him that you had denied me. I could see in some circumstances how a one-time indiscretion could occur, but you kept going back again and again. That took making a planned decision to betray me over and over again. In doing so, you demonstrated not only a lack of love, but a lack of respect for me. That I could never get past. Finally, the fact that you did things with him that you would not do with me was the ultimate in humiliation for me. You may not have meant it that way. You may have just been caught up in the circumstances and found it more exciting or acceptable. You may have just been selfish and wanted two kinds of sexual relationships. However, you thought about it, or didn't. Those actions were as great a display of disrespect and disdain you could possibly have paid to me or to any man. If the manner in which I treated you somehow contributed to a mental or emotional state on your part where you felt that I was something less than you wanted and not worth your love and respect, then it only makes me happier we're not together. In my opinion, anyone worth my love would think and act exactly the opposite of you. After a pause, she thought about it and nodded slightly. Let me answer your other question. I didn't fight for you because you weren't worth fighting for. Ivy was and will always be worth fighting for because I'm the center of her world, and because she'd do the same for me. As we watched the groaning Sullivan, I asked her, "Hope that man keeps you happy for long?" I turned after asking her and walked back to my car and wife, not really expecting an answer or caring about one. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Alexander Carrington stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, gazing out at the city skyline. At 42, he was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. As the CEO of a global logistics empire, Alex had built his success on a relentless pursuit of control and perfection. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, your son is here to see you." "Send him in," Alex replied, his stern expression softening slightly. 10-year-old Max burst into the room, clutching Claire's iPhone in his small hands. "Dad, what's a prenup?" he asked. Alex froze, his blood running cold. "Where did you hear that word, Max?" "It was in Mom's email," Max said innocently, holding up the phone. Feigning calm, Alex took the device from his son. His heart stopped as his eyes landed on an email thread between Claire and her divorce lawyer. They were plotting, waiting for his father's inheritance. Something had clearly shifted. "Max, why don't you go play in my secretary's office for a while?" Alex said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to your mother." As Max left, Alex strode purposefully to the elevator, his mind racing. He found Claire in their sprawling penthouse, lounging on a chaise with a fashion magazine in hand. "Care to explain this?" he demanded, tossing the phone onto the coffee table. Claire's face paled as her eyes flicked to the screen. She snatched up the phone, her gaze darting between the email and Alex. "How dare you go through my private emails?" she snapped. "Our son found it," Alex replied, his tone icy. "Now explain." Claire's shoulders sagged for a moment before she straightened, a cold smile curling her lips. "I was waiting for your father's inheritance," she said with chilling nonchalance. "But plans change." Alex felt like he'd been punched in the gut, but he wasn't finished yet. With a calm, almost chilling smile, he pulled out his phone and showed Claire a series of incriminating photos, her locked in an intimate embrace with Mark, one of his top employees and an old friend. "You won't get a dime," Alex said softly. "You cheated. Remember the prenup?" Claire's initial shock gave way to disbelief. "How did you?" Alex cut her off, his voice turning to ice. "You're done. Pack your things tonight." Panic began to seep into Claire as the weight of her mistake became clear, but it was too late. Alex turned on his heel and walked away, leaving her to face the consequences. Across town, Mark Stevens sat alone in a dimly lit bar, nursing his third whiskey of the night. His phone buzzed relentlessly, Claire's name flashing on the screen alongside increasingly frantic messages. Their plan had unraveled spectacularly. In a nearby luxury hotel suite, Claire paced back and forth, her pristine designer luggage a stark contrast to her frazzled appearance. She had underestimated Alex, but she wasn't about to admit defeat just yet. The next morning, Alex stormed into the offices of Kingan Logistics, his thunderous expression scattering employees like leaves in a gale. Once in his office, he wasted no time. Get Mark Stevens' access revoked, completely. Now, he barked at his head of security, leaving no room for argument. But Mark had anticipated this. Before his access was severed, he managed to leak sensitive business information to several of Kingan Logistics' biggest competitors. Meanwhile, Claire began plotting her own revenge. Leveraging her sharp social skills and extensive network, she spread malicious rumors about Alex and his supposedly crumbling empire, tarnishing his once spotless reputation. As Alex reviewed damage reports in his office, his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Victor Zorin on the line for you." Alex's eyes narrowed. Victor Zorin, a ruthless Russian oligarch who had been circling Kingan Logistics for years. Picking up the phone, Alex's voice was cool and controlled. "Zorin, what can I do for you?" "Ah, Alexander." Zorin's heavily accented voice oozed false sympathy. "I heard about your recent troubles. Perhaps now is a good time to discuss the merger we've been dancing around?" Alex's grip tightened on the phone. "Kingan Logistics is not for sale, Zorin. Not now, not ever." As he hung up, Alex realized this was no longer just about personal betrayal. His entire empire was under siege, and the battle had only just begun. Alex sat across from Liam Quinn, a brilliant but enigmatic investigator he'd hired to dig into Claire, Mark, and Zorin. The findings were worse than Alex had imagined. "They've been stealing from the company for months," Liam said, sliding a file across the desk. "Their plan is to bankrupt you, destroy your empire, and flee the country with the profits." Alex's jaw tightened as he flipped through the damning evidence. Before he could fully process the betrayal, his phone buzzed. It was his CFO. "Sir, we have a problem. Zorin just launched a series of strategic moves that are crippling our supply chain." Hanging up, Alex knew time wasn't on his side. He arranged an emergency meeting with Zorin at an exclusive private club. The Russian oligarch sat across from him, exuding smug overconfidence. "Your company is on its knees, Alexander. I'm offering to buy you out at a fraction of its value. It's a generous offer, considering your circumstances." Alex leaned forward, his gaze steely. "You underestimate me, Zorin. This isn't over." As he walked out, his mind was already working through a plan. Not just to survive, but to annihilate his enemies. Back at his office, Alex initiated his counterattack. Using the evidence Liam had provided, he filed a lawsuit against Claire and Mark, accusing them of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Within hours, he began dismantling Mark's influence within Kingan Logistics, firing his allies, freezing his accounts, and cutting off every avenue of power. It was precise and devastating, a calculated strike. As night fell, Alex stood at his office window, looking out over the city and the empire he'd built. The war was just beginning, but Alexander Carrington was a man who played to win, and he would, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Claire Carrington paced her rented apartment, the designer luggage surrounding her a glaring mismatch to the modest space. Scrolling through her contacts, she searched for someone who could help her turn the tables. Her finger hovered over a name. Andrea Wells, a relentless investigative journalist. A cold smile spread across Claire's lips as she hit the call button. "Andrea, it's Claire Carrington. I have a story for you. How would you like an exclusive on the dark side of Alexander Carrington's empire?" Across town, Alex sat reviewing the latest reports on the chaos Claire and Mark had caused when his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, there's a Ms. Wells from the Tribune on the line. She's asking for a comment on some allegations." Alex's eyes narrowed. The battle had escalated. Picking up the phone, his voice was calm and measured. "Ms. Wells, what can I do for you?" Andrea launched into a litany of accusations. Corruption, abusive leadership, shady dealings. Alex listened silently, his mind already calculating his next move. When she finished, he replied with only 2 words. "No comment." Hanging up, he immediately dialed Liam Quinn. "I need everything you have on Claire and Mark, now." Days passed, and the city buzzed with rumors. Headlines screamed of Alex's alleged misdeeds, each accusation more damning than the last. Claire watched from the sidelines, a smug smile on her face as she fed Andrea a steady stream of half-truths and fabrications. Mark, still reeling from his humiliating exit from Carrington Logistics, supplied insider details that added credibility to their claims. But Claire wasn't content with just tarnishing Alex's reputation. She wanted to hurt him where it truly mattered. "I want full custody of Max," she told her lawyer, her voice sharp with determination. "Paint Alex as an unfit father. Use whatever means necessary." Caught in the crossfire, Max retreated into himself. At school, he overheard whispers about his father and noticed the pitying looks from teachers. At home, he felt the tension. Alex's barely contained fury radiating like a storm ready to break. Max didn't fully understand what was happening. He only knew his world was unraveling. Alex, for his part, had anticipated Claire's move. When her lawyer filed for emergency custody, Alex's team was ready to counter. They leaked their own story to the press, a sordid account of Claire's affair, her theft from the company, and her manipulation of Max for her own benefit. Public sympathy, fickle as ever, began to shift. Claire found herself on the receiving end of scathing editorials and relentless social media attacks. Her carefully crafted image as the wronged wife crumbled. In court, Alex's lawyers were unyielding. They presented damning evidence of Claire's infidelity, her attempts to circumvent the prenup, and her plans to flee the country with stolen company funds. The judge, a stern woman with steely eyes, listened impassively. When the gavel fell, Claire's world shattered. Custody is awarded to the father, Alexander Carrington. The mother, Claire Carrington, is granted supervised visitation pending further review. Claire stumbled out of the courtroom, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Outside, a swarm of reporters waited, microphones thrust forward, cameras flashing. She pushed past them, her face a mask of despair and rage. Moments later, Alex emerged, holding Max's small hand tightly. He faced the cameras, his expression grim but composed. "Justice has been served," he said simply. "My son and I asked for privacy during this difficult time." As they drove away, Max looked up. "Dad, is it over now?" Alex's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Not yet, son," he said softly, "but it will be soon." Meanwhile, Mark Stevens sat in a dingy motel room, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and crumpled papers. His laptop glowed in the dim light, displaying financial reports and internal memos from Carrington Logistics. For days, he'd been searching for a weakness, any chink in Alex's armor. His phone buzzed, a call from an unknown number. He answered, his voice weary. "Stevens." "Mr. Stevens," a voice replied, heavily accented and unmistakably Russian. "I believe we share a mutual interest in Alexander Carrington's downfall." Mark sat up, his mind racing. Who is this? A friend. One who can provide the resources you need to finish what you started. It was Zorov. Mark's pulse quickened. This was it, his last chance to strike back at Alex. "I'm listening," he said. Across the city, in his penthouse office, the next move was already being planned. Alex was in the middle of a video conference when alarms erupted from his computer. Red warning messages flashed across multiple screens. "Sir," his head of IT's panicked voice crackled through the speakers. "We're under attack. Massive data breaches. Our logistics software is compromised, and shipments are being rerouted." Alex's expression darkened. He had anticipated this move, but the sheer scale of the attack exceeded his expectations. "Initiate Protocol Omega," he ordered, his tone cold and resolute. As chaos consumed Carrington Logistics, Alex remained eerily calm. Shipments were delayed, contracts breached, and the company's stock price plummeted. His phone rang incessantly, board members, partners, and media outlets all demanding answers. In a hidden command center deep beneath Carrington Tower, Alex monitored the escalating situation. Liam Quinn stood beside him, providing real-time updates. "It's Mark," Liam confirmed grimly. "He's working with a team of elite hackers. But there's more. He's got Zorov backing him." "Serious backing." Alex nodded, unsurprised. "And our countermeasures?" Liam's lips curled into a predatory smile, though his eyes remained cold. "In place and ready. Just say the word." Alex's finger hovered over a button on the console. Memories of betrayal flashed in his mind. Claire, Mark, and others who had turned against him. He thought of Max, caught in the middle of this war. His jaw tightened. "Execute," he commanded. Across the city, in his motel room, Mark Stevens was celebrating. His laptop displayed the havoc unfolding at Carrington Logistics. Zorov's voice crackled through the speaker, satisfaction dripping from every word. "Excellent work, Mr. Stevens," Zorov purred. "Carrington is finished. I'll have my team draft the acquisition papers immediately." Mark poured himself another drink, grinning. "Here's to the fall of Alexander Carrington," he toasted. As he raised the glass to his lips, His laptop screen abruptly went black. Then, line by line, ominous text began to appear. Did you really think it would be that easy, Mark? Mark's blood ran cold. He recognized the writing style. No, he whispered, his voice trembling. No, no, no. His phone died. The lights in the motel room flickered and went out. In the suffocating darkness, heavy footsteps echoed outside his door. In his opulent Moscow office, Zorov frowned as his connection with Mark was suddenly severed. Barking orders at his subordinates, he demanded answers. But as reports poured in, frozen assets, raids on his properties, and arrest warrants issued in multiple countries, he realized with mounting dread that he had underestimated Alexander Carrington for the final time. Back in New York, Alex watched passively as FBI agents escorted Mark out of the motel in handcuffs. On another screen, Zorov was being led from his Moscow office by Russian authorities. Liam let out a low whistle. Remind me never to get on your bad side, boss. Alex didn't respond. His gaze remained fixed on the monitors, on the empire he had salvaged and the enemies he had dismantled. He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt nothing but emptiness. His phone buzzed with a text from Max. Dad, when are you coming home? Alex closed his eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on him. It's over, he murmured. Let's go home. Claire Carrington stood in the lobby of Carrington Tower, her designer outfit in stark contrast to her disheveled appearance. She clutched her handbag tightly, as if it were a lifeline. I need to see Alex. Mr. Carrington, she said hoarsely to the receptionist. Please. It's urgent. The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition, but she maintained her professional demeanor. One moment, please. Upstairs, Alex was reviewing the final reports on Zorov's takedown when his intercom buzzed. Mr. Carrington, your ex-wife is here to see you. Alex's jaw tightened. He considered turning her away, but curiosity won out. Send her up. When Claire entered his office, Alex was standing by the window, his back to her. She hesitated, then took a cautious step forward. Alex, save it, he interrupted, turning to face her. His eyes were cold, devoid of warmth or recognition. What do you want, Claire? She flinched at his tone but pressed on. I've made a terrible mistake. I see that now. I'll leave Mark. I'll do anything. Please, just give me another chance. Alex laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that made Claire recoil. Another chance? You tried to destroy me, Claire. You used our son as a pawn in your games. And now, what? You think batting your eyelashes will make it all go away? He moved to his desk and pressed a button. A holographic display flared to life, projecting social media feeds, news articles, and financial reports. You're finished, Claire. Your name is mud in every circle that matters. No one will hire you, partner with you, or even be seen with you in public. Claire's face crumpled as the weight of her downfall sank in. What have you done? She whispered. I ruined you. Alex replied coldly. Just like you tried to ruin me. The difference is, I succeeded. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she collapsed into a chair. What about Max? He needs his mother. Alex's expression hardened further. You lost the right to call yourself his mother when you used him to hurt me. He's better off without you. As if on cue, Alex's phone buzzed with a message from Mark's lawyer. Client willing to make a deal. Full confession in exchange for a reduced sentence. Alex held the message up for Claire to see, watching as the last trace of fight left her eyes. It's over, Claire, he said firmly. Mark is going to prison, and he's taking what's left of your reputation with him. Claire stood on unsteady legs, her world in ruins. As she reached the door, Alex's voice cut through the silence one final time. Oh, and Claire, he said, his tone icy, I bought out the Tribune. Andrea Wells won't be writing any more stories about me, or you. The door clicked shut behind her with a sound that felt like a final nail in the coffin. Alex turned back to the window, gazing out at the city he now unquestionably ruled. He had won, utterly and completely. Yet, instead of triumph, he felt a hollow ache in his chest. His phone buzzed again. Max, Dad, can we have pizza tonight? A faint smile broke through Alex's stern facade. Perhaps he wasn't entirely hollow after all. In a maximum security prison upstate, Mark Stevens sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the blank wall. His lawyer had just left, confirming that his plea deal had been accepted. A decade behind bars, far better than the life sentence Zorov now faced. As night fell over New York, 3 lives lay in shambles. Claire, once the toast of high society, now a disgraced pariah wandering the streets with nowhere to go. Mark, locked away, his ambitions reduced to ashes. Zorov, his sprawling criminal empire dismantled, awaiting justice in a Russian courtroom. At the pinnacle of it all stood Alexander Carrington, the man who had orchestrated their downfalls. He had won. Completely. In his Moscow penthouse, Zorov stood by the window, a glass of vodka in hand. He stared at the city lights, his reflection in the glass revealing a man consumed by fury and obsession. Alexander Carrington had humiliated him, dismantled his operations, and left him a shadow of his former self. But Zorov was far from finished. His phone buzzed, displaying a text from an unknown number. "It's done. The syndicate is ready." A cold smile crept across Zorov's face. For months, he had been rebuilding his network, calling in favors from the darkest corners of the underworld. Now, backed by an influential Eastern European crime syndicate, he was ready to strike back. Across the ocean, Alex Carrington sat in his office, reviewing quarterly reports. The past few months had been quiet, too quiet. A nagging sense of foreboding lingered, a feeling that something was brewing. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Carrington, we have a situation." Alex's eyes narrowed. "What kind of situation?" "Sir, we're under attack. Massive cyber attacks across all systems. Our firewalls are failing." Alex's jaw tightened. He'd been anticipating retaliation. Initiate Protocol Omega. Now. But as the hours passed, it became clear this was no ordinary assault. Zorov had learned from his mistakes. This time, the attacks were coordinated and relentless, targeting not just Carrington Logistics but Alex's entire empire. Banks reported suspicious activity in Alex's accounts. Sensitive information was leaked to the media, sending stock prices into freefall. Investors panicked, pulling their funds en masse. In the war room, Alex stood amidst a sea of screens, each displaying the chaos engulfing his businesses. Liam Quinn burst through the door, his face grim. "Boss, it's worse than we thought. Zorov's got a team of corrupt lawyers filing international lawsuits against us. Environmental damage, labor violations, you name it. They're trying to bleed us dry." Alex's fists clenched. The battle was far from over. Alex's mind raced, calculating moves and countermoves. Before he could respond, another alert blared. "Sir," his head of security's voice crackled over the intercom, "we've detected an unauthorized entry at your private residence." The line went dead. For the first time in years, Alex felt a cold fear grip his heart. "Get me to the house. Now." The drive to his mansion was a blur. As they approached, signs of a struggle came into view. Broken glass, overturned furniture. Alex charged inside, shouting, "Max? Dad!" Max's voice called out from upstairs. Alex took the stairs 3 at a time, bursting into his son's room. Max was huddled in a corner, shaken but unharmed. Near the window, an unconscious man dressed in black lay sprawled on the floor. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, pulling Max into a tight embrace. Max nodded, his voice muffled against his father's chest. "I remembered what you taught me about being prepared." Alex's throat tightened with a mixture of pride and guilt. He had taught his son to be strong, to survive, but at what cost? As security swarmed the house, Alex's phone rang. The caller ID read unknown. "Mr. Carrington," Zoran's voice came through, smooth as silk. "I trust you have my attention now." Alex's voice was ice cold. "You've made a grave mistake, Zoran." "Oh, I don't think so," Zoran replied, a hint of malice in his tone. "This is just the beginning. I'm going to take everything from you. Your money, your power, your legacy. And when you're left with nothing, broken and begging for mercy, that's when I'll end you." The line went dead. Alex glanced at Max, still clinging to him, then at the chaos around them. For a fleeting moment, doubt crept in. Had he underestimated Zoran? Had his arrogance endangered everything he held dear? But the doubt vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by an icy, unyielding resolve. "Zoran wants a war?" Alex muttered. "We'll give him one." He turned to Liam, who stood ready for orders. "Call the team. It's time to end this." The safe house was an unassuming brownstone in a quiet neighborhood. Its basement, however, was a high-tech command center. Alex sat at the head of a long table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and operatives. Liam Quinn, looking like he hadn't slept in days, stood at his right hand. "All right," Alex began, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "Zoran thinks he has us cornered. It's time to show him how wrong he is. Liam, what have you got?" Liam tapped on a tablet, and holographic displays illuminated the room. "We've identified the key players in Zoran's syndicate, his financiers, enforcers, and political connections. They're spread across Eastern Europe and Asia, but they all report to this man. A photo appeared on the screen. A severe-looking man with cold, calculating eyes. Dmitry Volov, Liam continued. Zoran's right-hand man and the mastermind behind the cyber attacks against us. Alex studied the face, committing it to memory. And our plan? Alex asked. We hit them where it hurts, Liam said, a predatory grin spreading across his face. We've got teams ready to move on their money laundering operations in Cyprus, their weapon caches in Ukraine, and their drug routes through Turkey. When we're done, Zoran's entire network will be in chaos. Alex nodded, then turned to his head of legal affairs. And the lawsuits? The lawyer gave a thin smile. Countersuits are ready to file in every jurisdiction. More importantly, we've uncovered evidence of judicial bribery. Once this goes public, half the judges on Zoran's payroll will be facing charges of their own. One by one, Alex's team laid out their strategies: financial maneuvers to freeze Zoran's assets, media campaigns to sway public opinion, and backdoor diplomacy to secure international cooperation in dismantling the syndicate. As the meeting wound down, Alex stood. You all know what's at stake. Zoran thinks he can destroy everything we've built. We're going to show him the true meaning of destruction. Execute the plan. No mercy, no quarter. The team dispersed, each member heading out to set Alex's counterattack into motion. But as the others left, Liam stayed behind. Boss, there's one more thing, he said quietly. I think I've found a way to lure Zoran out into the open. But it's risky. Alex raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Liam laid out his plan. A false lead about a multi-billion-dollar deal in Dubai, too enticing for Zoran to resist. But the plan would require Alex to put himself directly in harm's way. It's dangerous, Liam admitted, but if it works, we can end this once and for all. Alex stood in thoughtful silence, weighing the risks. Finally, he nodded. Do it, but make sure Max is secure. I won't let Zoran use him against me again. As Liam left to set the trap, Alex remained alone in the command center. He thought of Claire, of Mark, and of all the adversaries he'd crushed to reach this point. Zoran was just another in a long line of enemies who had underestimated him, and he would be the last. Thousands of miles away, in a luxurious Moscow apartment, Zoran received an encrypted message. His eyes widened as he read the details of Carrington's supposed deal in Dubai. Prepare the jet, he barked at his assistant. We're going to the Middle East. The pieces were in place. The final battle was about to begin. Days later, Alex stood in the opulent lobby of Dubai's most exclusive hotel, surrounded by the world's business elite. The trap was set. Now, all he had to do was wait for Zoran to take the bait. He didn't have to wait long. A commotion at the entrance drew his attention. Victor Zoran strode in, flanked by bodyguards, his eyes scanning the room until they locked onto Alex. For a moment, the two men stared at each other across the crowded lobby. Then Zoran smiled, a cold, predatory grin, and began making his way toward Alex. But before he could reach him, chaos erupted. Police swarmed in from every entrance, shouting orders in Arabic and English. Zoran's face twisted in rage as realization dawned. Carrington, he roared, lunging forward. But it was too late. Officers tackled him to the ground, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. Alex watched passively as Zoran was led away, still shouting threats and obscenities. It was over. The man who had endangered everything Alex held dear was finished. As the dust settled, Alex's phone buzzed. A text from Liam. It's done. Volov and the others are in custody. The syndicate is finished. Alex allowed himself a small smile. He'd won again. But as he surveyed the chaos he had orchestrated, he felt no joy, no triumph, just a hollow emptiness. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was Max. Dad, are you okay? When are you coming home? Alex closed his eyes, suddenly weary. It was time to go home, to face the consequences of the world he had built. Months passed. The world watched in awe as Victor Zoran's criminal empire crumbled, its tentacles severed one by one. Alexander Carrington emerged from the ashes stronger than ever. His company's stock soared to unprecedented heights, cementing his position at the pinnacle of power. In his newly renovated office, Alex stood by the window, looking out over the city he now unquestionably ruled. The skyline was dotted with buildings bearing the Carrington name, a testament to his expanding empire. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Come in, he called, without turning around. Max entered, now a 16-year-old young man and the spitting image of his father. The board is ready for your presentation on the Zoran acquisition, Max said. Alex nodded, allowing himself a small smile. He had seized control of Zoran's legitimate business assets, expanding his reach into markets he had only dreamed of before. The aftermath of his victory had been fertile ground for his strategic mind, turning near defeat into unparalleled success. As they walked to the boardroom, Alex glanced at his son. Max had seen the darker side of his rise to power, the ruthlessness it took to survive in their world. But he had also witnessed his father's intelligence, resilience, and unwavering determination. "Remember, Max," Alex said as they paused outside the boardroom. "In this world, you're either the predator or the prey. Always be prepared. Always stay 3 steps ahead." Max nodded, his eyes serious. "I know, Dad. You've taught me well." For a moment, Alex saw something flicker in his son's gaze, admiration tinged with caution. Max respected his father's strength and ability to overcome any obstacle, but he was wary of the cold ruthlessness that defined Alex's path to the top. The board meeting unfolded with precision. Alex laid out his plans for further expansion, his strategic brilliance captivating the room. The executives listened in a mix of awe and fear, knowing all too well the consequences of crossing Alexander Carrington. He had proven his dominance time and again, with Claire, with Mark, and now with Zoran. Mercy and forgiveness were luxuries he could no longer afford. Later that evening, Alex stood on the balcony of his penthouse, a glass of scotch in hand. The city sprawled before him, a glittering testament to his power. For the first time, he felt truly untouchable. His mind drifted back to the day Max had innocently asked about prenuptial agreements, a moment that had unknowingly set in motion the chain of events leading him here. What began as a simple conversation had culminated in a battle for survival, one he had won at great cost. The city sparkled below, but Alex's thoughts lingered in the shadows of his victories, where power and sacrifice walked hand in hand. He felt no regret for the choices he'd made or the lives he destroyed. In Alex's mind, they were merely obstacles, challenges to overcome, nothing more. The world was a battlefield, and Alexander Carrington had emerged as its undisputed victor. As the sun set over his empire, Alex allowed himself a rare, genuine smile. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his reign. He was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Behind him, he heard the familiar sound of footsteps. Max joined him at the railing, his eyes scanning the glittering cityscape below. "It's incredible, isn't it?" Max said softly. "Everything you've built." Alex nodded, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "And someday, it'll all be yours." Max was silent for a moment, then turned to face his father. "Dad, do you ever wonder, was it worth it? The cost of getting here?" Alex met his son's gaze, seeing in it a warmth and humanity he had long since abandoned. For a fleeting moment, doubt flickered in his mind, but he pushed it aside. "In this world, Max, you take what you want, or watch someone else take it from you. I chose to take it. Remember that." Max nodded slowly, turning back to the view. Yet Alex could see the conflict in his son's expression, a struggle between admiration for his achievements and discomfort with the ruthless methods that had secured them. In that moment, Alex realized something profound. Though he had conquered the world, there was one thing he might never fully possess: his son's unwavering allegiance to his worldview. Max would forge his own path, shaped by but not beholden to his father's legacy. Strangely, Alex found he was at peace with that. Perhaps it was Max's role to be the one thing his empire had lacked: a moral compass. A reminder of the humanity Alex had sacrificed on his relentless climb to the top. As night fell over the city, father and son stood side by side, overlooking the empire they would shape together. The future stretched out before them, full of untold possibilities and challenges yet to come. Alexander Carrington had won his war. Now, it was time to secure a legacy that would endure for generations. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.